My op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is titled, "Democracy is Eroding Faster Than Experts Predicted. A Trump Insider's Resignation Helps Explain Why." And, you know, I start out with this point that Joe Kent, this hardcore MAGA right-wing election denier, whatever, that Trump put in charge of the National Counterterrorism Center. He was the director. He resigned yesterday with this very loud resignation letter saying, quote, "Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby." And I agree with the sentiment. Although I think it's a little more complex than that, Saudi Arabia and the UAE wanted us to strike Iran as well, and they're giving Jared Kushner millions of dollars every month, literally, in fees to manage the billions of dollars that they've given him. And, they wanted this war and still want it, and want us to basically destroy the Iranian leadership. So it goes beyond just that. But the bottom line here is basically that Donald Trump got us into this war with no congressional authorization. It's an illegal war. It's a complete violation of our Constitution. Now, the V-Dem Institute is an organization based out of Sweden. It's in the University of Gothenburg, and they track democracies around the world. And they write, and I quote, "The speed with which American democracy is currently being dismantled is unprecedented in modern history." They make the note, they point out that in 14 months, Donald Trump has moved America closer to becoming a fascist country than any of the previous, the people whose names we always come up with, Pinochet, Hitler, Mussolini, fill in the blanks, right? Orban, Putin. They all took years to accomplish what Trump has done in months. And as a result, the Gothenburg Institute writes, civil rights and equality before the law, freedom of expression, media freedom are now at their lowest levels in 60 years. And the extensive damage already done to American democracy under the second Trump presidency in just 1 year stands out on the world map. Typically, they write, autocratizing countries have taken about a decade to make such a deep dive, and the speed of the decline is comparable to some coups d'etats. In other words, these are all one thing, right, this list. The U.S.-Israeli war against Iran without congressional approval, the destruction of American soft power of USAID and Voice of America, the gutting of the social safety net, trillions of dollars of cuts in Medicaid, the dialing back food stamps, the end of the ACA subsidies, the creation of a masked secret police force and construction of hundreds of concentration camps across the country, the state-by-state destruction of voting rights now poised to go national, the rewriting of America's history, the defunding of our schools, the capture of much of America's media by right-wing fascist-aligned billionaires, the threats of from the FCC against the remaining free media, the flagrant violation of thousands of court orders, the illegal impoundment of congressionally authorized funds, the attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, the naked appeals to white Christian nationalism and insistence that the U.S. was created as a Christian nation, the stripping of women's and racial, religious, and gender minority rights, the massive tax cuts for the morbidly rich, and the tax tariff increases on working-class people, further infuriating the middle class, the firing of hundreds of thousands of federal employees, including thousands working in Social Security and Medicare, ending pollution controls and allowing more poisons in our air, water, and food, spreading health disinformation that destroys people's faith in science and government, war making against foreign governments without congressional authorization or public debate, and kneecapping green initiatives that could have made us free of fossil fuel dependence. All of that is tied into the destruction of democracy here in the United States, flipping this democracy into fascism. I mean, we have seen this before, right? And this is what the V-Day Institute is pointing out. This is what Putin did in Russia. It's what Orban did in Hungary. It's what Mussolini did in Italy, Hitler in Germany, Franco in Spain, Pinochet in Chile, Marcos in the Philippines, etc. It's an old path. What Trump is doing is nothing new. It's just never been done here in the United States, except in the 1840s in the Deep South, when the Confederacy, another fascist form of government, rose. And, you know, the speed with which they're doing this is absolutely shocking. And, of course, the reason why it's so fast is because of all these right-wing billionaires who funded Project 2025 through the Heritage Foundation. So, bottom line here, this leaves it to us. We, the average Americans, I mean, we're the ones, right? You've got this pathetically supine Mike Johnson, who is supposed to be in charge of, you know, he's supposed to be a peer of Trump, right? We've got three branches. They're supposed to be co-equal. He's supposed to represent him and John Thune represent the congressional branch. But instead, they've just rolled over on their backs and said, please rub my tummy, Donald. And then you got John Roberts, who should be Trump's peer, who should be able to speak to him as equals. And he's saying, oh, well, the president can do anything he wants. He has absolute immunity. He can commit crimes while in office, and you can't prosecute him. I mean, really? The checks and balances that the founders envisioned, that Montesquieu so brilliantly argued for back in the early 1700s, and that the founders and the framers wrote into the Constitution, are being completely ignored or dismantled, which leaves it to us, right? We're the only ones left here defending our democracy. So we've got to be speaking out. We've got to be demanding that our Democratic politicians grow a damn spine and begin seriously to take seriously Trump's and Hegseth's neo-fascism and Heritage's neo-fascism as well, before it's gone too far to stop. So I'll see you in the streets on March 28th, eh? It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone.
If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
My parents are from countries where mangoes grow wild and bold, and eagles cry the sky in arcs and dips. America loved this bird too, and made its clutch olives and arrows. Some think if an eaglet falls, the mother will swoop down to catch it. It won't. The eagle must fly on its own accord by first testing the air slide over each pin feather. Even in a letter of wind, a mother holds so much power. After the pipping of the egg, after the branching, an eagle is on its own. Must make the choice on its own, no matter what it's been taught. Some forget that pound for pound, eagle feathers are stronger than an airplane wing. And even one letter, one vote, can make the difference for every bright thing. That poem is one vote by Amy, and let's see if I can do honor to her last name, Nezuk Umatatil. Forgive my pronunciation. I will practice more next time. Each of you has more power. Together, you have more power than an eagle's wing. An eagle's feather, your vote, your voice is more power than you recognize. I am here. My name is Jeff Smith, here at the Thom Hartmann program to speak truth to power. But I don't mean that I hope a politician is listening. I hope you are listening. And I hope you will wield your power. I have been working for a while on, I don't know whether to call it a grand unified theory. It's not grand enough yet, and it's not unified yet enough. But it is how I'm starting to think about levers of power and what those levers of power might be. I want to ask you what you think the critical levers of power are that we should be wrestling with, that we should be paying attention to, that we should be counting, that we should be strategizing for. I've started to organize them. I don't know whether to call them aphorisms. They might be aphorisms. They might not be individually pithy enough or even collectively pithy enough to be aphorisms. I'd like to think of them as facts, but some of them are more strategically opinionated. And by that I mean a perspective is distinct from something that can be easily mathematically measured. We might call them principles, but that also might give them too much credit. So I just think of them as 26 things. We'll change the number, and I'll ask you what you think we should add to the number. This is a work in progress. I'm working on it for some degree years. I'm going to share it with you today, or at least as much as I can share before the first break. Maybe we'll go in and share a little bit of it in the second, because I've never tried to do it out loud before. It's, if I were going to write an outline of stuff that I think we needed to keep in mind in order to be strategically fit to advocate for, to convene in favor of and together around democracy, what are things we should be able to keep in mind? What are things that are important for us to catalog in our own brains, to access as we process problems, as we debate the best approach to make the world a little bit better rather than a lot worse? It is not in perfect order. I have some categories. Electoral math. I have another category called psychology and persuasion. Another category called money. Another category called media. And another category which is a little bit of a cheat. It named, instead of being called miscellaneous, I called it power. But the whole list could be called power. So first, electoral math. Again, things that I will come back to in response to calls, and if I fed all these things to a robot, maybe even a robot could take my spot and give some of the same answers I might give. Here's the first, and the first is not the most important, but it is useful. And it was taught to me by I think he was 78 years old, an activist at the time, and he probably said it to me 5 times. And he said, the most important vote a member of a legislative body ever takes is the vote to organize the chamber. The most important vote a member of a legislative body, let's call it Congress, ever takes is the vote to organize the chamber. What does that mean? Well, it means when you decide who the Senate President, who the Speaker of the House is going to be, when you decide what the committees are going to be, which decides what bills will even be heard, which decide the composition of committees to see if those bills have a chance of making it out of committee. But that is the most important decision. A lot goes downstream of that, including it means whoever wins the majority matters a whole lot. That's my first one. The second, and this is the context of this one, of understanding electoral math, is just to understand what we're up against. Because we can be grumpy, and there's so much reason to be grumpy, and I want us to be strategically grumpy. I want us to be grumpy. There's a reason. There's a biological reason. There's a reason in terms of how we developed as human beings for us to have, an evolutionary reason for us to have anger, for us to get grumpy. I think it is to spur us to action, to avoid things we shouldn't avoid, to fight or run away from things we should run away from, to defeat things that need to be defeated. And we can translate, instead of just our fear, fight or flight, to something that is more proactive. Anger isn't the best place to live all the time, but let's at least be strategic about it, or maybe therefore, let's be intentional about it. The most important vote a member of Congress ever takes is the vote to organize a chamber. Number 2. The U.S. Senate map is terrible. The U.S. Senate map is terrible. Number 3, the Electoral College math is terrible. It's terrible. 4, 25% of voters are lefties, self-described. About 25% out of 100, 25 per 100%, are self-described progressives, self-described lefties. Number 5, politicians' job is to gain and wield power, to channel and reflect the power landscape. A politician's job, not their moral responsibility, not what we hope for them. I didn't even say their mission. I certainly didn't say their vision. I didn't say their values. But at some level, their job is to gain and wield power, to channel and reflect the power landscape. So when we understand what we're up against, understand the most important vote a member of Congress ever takes is a vote to organize a chamber. U.S. Senate math is terrible. The Electoral College math related to that thing prior to that is also pretty bad. 25% of voters are lefties or progressives. The politician's job is to gain power. So what does that mean? It means a bunch of things. This is the first category. I got 5. Let's take your calls. What do you think ought to be in our power landscape? What do you think are the most important principles, facts, realities to be aware of before we do, or as we do, our strategic thinking? I say we need to build the percentage, get it up from 25. We have to work on that power landscape. We have to make the maps better so that when politicians are sticking their fingers in the wind goes towards democracy, goes towards the future, goes towards a better environment, goes towards a better middle class, goes towards better lives for more people, goes towards compassion and love. And we have to recognize majoritarian democracy needs a coalition government. People in this show, people who listen, part of this community, you wield power. How are we going to wield that power? Let's wield it strategically. Let's wield it with heart and brains. And this week, I want to share my strategic landscape, something South aphorisms, and also garner some for you. Call the number here, 202-808-9925.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. 202-808-9925. We'll have news with my dad at the top of the next hour. You stood in line at the DMV. You paid the fee, smiled for that terrible photo, and then the DMV turned around and sold. Talk about that, not at 9:15 as the document says, but at 9:20. This is the next thing. The question I have for you all is, what do you think are the key principles that we should be having in mind as we grapple strategically with how to make the world better? I hope that exercise is interesting to more than just me. Maybe it should be a book. Mike from Portland, you're on the air.
Yes, I was calling. I'm kind of curious if these elected officials are committing treason because they don't do their job. As a matter of fact, they can't even define what a war is. Rand Paul asked Rubio if somebody came in and took our president, would that be an act of war? They can't even answer that. So they're in dereliction to their responsibility of the Constitution. If they're not upholding their oath to the Constitution, and they're actively supporting AIPAC, which I believe is not even registered. So they're taking money from a foreign entity representing a foreign government illegally, and then they're supporting the agenda of a foreign country which has free education, free housing, universal health care, and we ship them $18 billion a year. That, to me, is treasonous.
So when you asked it as a question, I could take that question as a rhetorical one that didn't merit a response, or wasn't asking for a response. Were you asking me to answer the question of is it treason, or you wanted to sort of make that point that what's going on is bad and people should be aware that it's bad?
I'm curious if, in your view, that would constitute.
All right, so I'll take the bait. So I think it's bad.
Every time they're on Congress floor, you know?
So I missed that last thing. Say that again, Mike.
They should start every speech on the House floor with what treason is and what is taking place in Congress. They're themselves to the will of Benjamin Netanyahu and AIPAC.
Yeah.
That's treasonous.
Where I would agree with you is that it's bad. What I would agree with you is that it's counter-constitutional. What I would agree with you on is for all of these Constitution thumpers, they aren't really. They are when it advances their own views, their objectives, the power of them and their Confederates, but they're not.
They're waging war for another nation. They're actively.
Do you want my answer on? Do you want my answer about treason, Mike? Do you want my answer about treason?
Yes, sir.
So where I would agree with you is it's bad. Where we would disagree, it just sort of depends on how we define treason. If it sounds like your definition of treason is if you're doing something on behalf of another government without constitutional support. That's one possible definition. Definition I'm familiar with is under U.S. Constitution Article 3, Section 3. Treason consists in levying war against the United States or adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. Now, it's a hard stretch to say that it's levying war against the United States. You could say, but if you're going to say it's adhering to enemies, you have to describe Israel as an enemy. And that's what some people might want to define Israel as, but that's not currently probably the definition by the, Secretary of State's Office, Department of Justice, Department of War. So that's my, hopefully not too picky in an answer.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. A lot of people wonder, where did this whole right-wing movement to basically gut our freedoms and end DEI and all this other, where did this all begin? It all started back in 1951 with a book called The Conservative Mind, From Burke to Eliot by Russell Kirk. And he argued that if the middle class ever got too big, you'd see young people and women and racial minorities all get up on their hind feet and start protesting and basically screwing up America. And in the 50s, even Republicans thought he was nuts. But then the 60s happened and all those protests, and suddenly Republicans thought, yeah, he's right. We've got to destroy the middle class, or at least cut it back. And that was Reagan's mandate when he came into office in 1981. There's a whole article about this. You can read all the details. It's titled The GOP's 60-Year Conspiracy to Kill Our Democracy. None dare call it treason, but I will. Over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
We think of levers and power. I talked about the electoral math as my first one. We've also got money, media, power itself, psychology and persuasion. It is Tuesday News Day. What are the critical things that we should be grappling with? We talked about airports yesterday. There were shutdowns in airports. There were hours and hours long lines, including those that bent around the building outside in order to get into the line that would get you into the line to get you through security so you get into line to get on the airplane. What else is striking your disfancy? What other pieces of news we got to cover? We will be doing news with my dad at the top of the next hour. Let's go to John from SeaTac, Washington. John, you're on the air.
Hey, how you doing today? I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome.
I would like to address the fairness of things. You know, the reason we got people to the left, the reason we got people to the right is because of a sense of unfairness and the way they're spending the money. I am dead set against this war. I think that it's a horrible waste of money and that they not to hurt the environment the way they do. We go to such trouble to protect our environment with safety precautions, to keep oil out of the oceans, and then we willfully blow up oil tankers and pollute the oceans and the seas. I don't believe either the left or the right, these people want this attack on Mother Earth, and I hope everybody gets out to the rallies, and I don't want us to look at it being left or right, but being together as Americans is the message. We need the left. You got to talk to the right, and you guys on the right, we need to talk to each other on the left because this insanity needs to stop.
Yeah, they can play us against each other and then, do whatever they want. So I hear that. There is, of course, a contingent that has been advocating for an attack on Iran for a long time, and it wasn't until, coincidentally or not, Donald Trump was facing some topics he didn't want to tackle that he switched away from his position in order to do this attack. You mentioned bringing people out this weekend. You got anybody you're going to bring with you? You got anybody you're going to try to, who's been a long time watcher of democracy, but first time caller of attending a protest?
Yeah, I will be there, and I'm talking to everybody to be there to just get out and make sure that our representatives, and like the caller before, these people that we've elected aren't doing their jobs. The TSA agents aren't getting paid. The ICE agents are getting paid, and they're just standing around there doing nothing. And I can't believe the level of ignorance that our society, humanity, has come to in this day and age. We're smarter than this. We're better than this. And that's together. That's the people on the right, and that's the people on the left coming together in the middle because we are smart and we can solve these problems. And we need a sense of fairness and to come together as decent human beings for just the sake of doing something right.
Appreciate it, John. You have a great day. I want to add something. It's a decent segue into my next little section on psychology and persuasion. First principle there, social proof is the most powerful persuasive tool. The most persuasive tool there is when someone you know and or trust and or respect and or just relate to shares what they think, shares who they're voting for, shares what they value, what they see, how they understand things. It's the most persuasive thing there is. When you see more people who you know and or trust and or respect or at least relate to, who point in a particular direction, it makes much more likely and more persuasive than anything else, much more likely to go and point also in that direction. There's that scene in A Few Good Men when Noah Wyle, before the show The Pit, this was his first big role, first time at least I ever noticed him, was getting asked and about if there was anything in the Marine Code of Conduct that explained what a code red was. A code red was the sort of bad thing that Marines would do to punish another Marine if they didn't do the right thing. He said, oh no, there's nothing in the Code of Conduct. He showed Kevin Bacon, the lawyer, shows him a number of books. He said, what about this book? What about this book? No, it's not in any of these. And then Tom Cruise in Redirect gets up and says, can you show me in the Marine Code of Conduct where the mess hall is? And he says, no. He says, what about this book? What about this book? He says, no. And he says, well, are you telling me the entire time you've been a Marine, you've never had a meal? He's like, well, no, sir, 3 squares a day. He said, well, if it's not any of these books, how could that be possible? And he said, no, Wiley says, I just follow the crowd at chow time, sir. I just follow the crowd at chow time. The most persuasive thing there is the crowd at chow time. and not just a chow tai. So one of the things we have to do is show that social proof. One of the ways we can do that is, in fact, this weekend. We'll be right back with your calls. We'll talk about, I'm interested in that question. We had a caller during the break who asked, is it treason? Is what happening right now without taking a war powers vote, is it treason? I wouldn't define it as treason, but just bad. But that might be interesting to talk about. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I am very glad you are listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Thank you for that. Call the number 202-808-9925.
The Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from Walking Your Blues Away, How to Heal the Mind and Create Emotional Well-Being from Chapter 1, How Trauma Sticks and the Mechanism of PTSD. From Legacy of Secrecy, The Long Shadow of the JFK Assassination by Lamar Waldron and me. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963, triggered cover-ups by officials, this is from the introduction, by the way, that continue to negatively impact American politics, life, and foreign policy. Legacy of Secrecy details those cover-ups and hidden investigations, many for the first time, including the reasons they were carried out under such intense secrecy. Most were spawned by John and Robert Kennedy's top-secret 1963 plan to stage a coup against Fidel Castro, a plan so highly classified that it only started to be exposed in 2005 and is finally revealed in this book. Their own confessions now show that three mafia bosses, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and Johnny Roselli, were behind JFK's assassination. They used parts of the secret coup plan to kill JFK in a way that forced Attorney General Robert Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson, excuse me, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and high CIA official Richard Helms to withhold critical information not only from the public and the press, but also from each other and sometimes their own investigators. It's important to keep in mind that JFK was murdered just a year after the tense nuclear standoff during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The main goals of U.S. officials were to prevent a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets and to protect JFK's ally high up in the Cuban government, Commander Juan Almeida, head of the Cuban Army in 1963, still listed as Cuba's #3 official today. While U.S. leaders have managed to prevent a confrontation with Russia and preserve a critical ally in the Cuban government, this limited the investigation into JFK's murder, allowing the three mafia chiefs and their associates to remain free. As a result, the long shadow of secrecy surrounding both JFK's murder and the coup plan set the stage for the murder of Martin Luther King, ultimately driving two presidents from office and bringing about the murders of 5 congressional witnesses in the mid-1970s. Legacy of Secrecy breaks excuse me, important new ground in key areas, detailing for the first time Louisiana Godfather Carlos Marcello's clear confession to ordering JFK's assassination. Marcello's criminal empire ranged from Dallas to Memphis, and previously secret files at the National Archives have shown that he made this confession in 1985 to an FBI informant ruled credible by a federal judge as part of a secret FBI undercover sting operation named Camtex. Exposed here for the first time, Camtex yielded Marcello's admission that he'd met Lee Harvey Oswald and set Jack Ruby up in business in Dallas. The operation also generated hundreds of hours of heretofore secret prison audio tapes of Marcello discussing his crimes, recorded using the FBI informant's bugged transistor radio. Yet the FBI and Justice Department withheld most of that information from the public and Congress for years until its revelation in this book. Carlos Marcello wasn't the only mob boss who confessed his involvement in JFK's murder to a trusted associate. Legacy also uncovers important new information about Marcello's partners in JFK's assassination, Tampa Godfather Santos Trafficante and Johnny Roselli, the Chicago Mafia's man in Las Vegas and Hollywood. Shortly before their deaths, both mobsters admitted their roles in JFK's murder to their attorneys. 2 of their associates with documented ties to the secret JFK Almeida coup plan likewise confessed. using exclusive new information supported by FBI files apparently withheld from Congress. This book names two of the Georgia men who paid James Earl Ray to kill the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, white supremacist Joseph Miltier and Hugh R. Spake. Miltier, who had been involved in Marcello's murder of JFK, was part of a small clique of racists in Atlanta who used Marcello to broker the contract to murder Dr. King. We document James Earl Ray's ties to Marcello's heroin smuggling operation and long overlooked evidence in FBI files linking Ray to Marcello's associate, Johnny Roselli. Finally, this book explains why Ray, while fleeing to Canada the day after killing Dr. King in Memphis, made a 400-plus mile detour south to Atlanta, where he contacted Spake to get help from Miltier. In 1979, the last congressional committee to investigate the murders of JFK and Dr. King, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded, quote, that Trafficante, like Marcello, had the motive, means, and opportunity to assassinate President Kennedy, end of quote from the congressional report. The HSCA had been created in the wake of Roselli's sensational murder, but the HSCA was unable to establish direct evidence of Marcello's complicity. And the same was true for Trafficante and Roselli, because the CIA, FBI, and other federal agencies withheld so many relevant files. The HSCA, headed by civil rights figure Louis Stokes, also concluded there was a likelihood of conspiracy in the assassination of Dr. King, and that financial gain was James Earl Ray's primary motivation. But they were unable to determine who had paid Ray or how the conspiracy had worked, because the FBI and other agencies had hid critical files. With the help of more than 24 associates of John and Robert Kennedy, backed up by thousands of recently released documents at the National Archives, many of which are quoted here for the first time, Legacy tells the full story denied to Congress and the American people, legacy of secrecy.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out.
And we're back. Thank you for being back. Call number here is 202-808-9925. It is Tuesday News Day. Also going through sort of a set of strategic principles for us to be aware so that we can be a smarter, more effective progressive movement. That is my Christmas wish, including Christmas in March. Let's also go to your calls. Let's go to Matthew from Napa County, beautiful part of the world. Hey, Matthew.
Hey, we're having a gorgeous day up here in Napa, working out in the countryside, cleaning some pools. But
I have to interrupt. Forgive me, I have to interrupt. Matthew, when you say in Napa County you're having a glorious day, it's a little bullying. Okay, it's a little because of course you are. Like it's not. It's just boasting. Go on.
It's a beautiful 70 degrees at 9:30 in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. All right. Go on.
Well, So, long story short here, I'm a Democrat, longtime voter. I listen to Thom all the time and a lot of the Sirius XM guys across the channels here. But my biggest issue with Democrats is that we've got to stop with this kumbaya. We need to reach across the aisle, and we need to try to find some middle ground with these Republicans. They are not doing that, okay? They are actively basically isolating the Democratic Party from any decision-making right now in government. They're not allowing us in committee meetings, hearings. They're not coming to the House for war authorization powers. You got ICE doing no-knock warrants all over the place, and all we get from the Democrats are strongly worded letters. And, we need to start fighting fire with fire as Democrats and actually start getting angry, like really angry. And doing something about it. And this upcoming election is going to be our first step. If we don't take back the House and the Senate, we're in deep trouble as a country. Yeah. And it's only going to get worse from here on out. So, if we don't get angry and actually start, doing some things here that actually have some meaning, and I don't want to start throwing, suggestions out here, but there are plenty of things I think we can do other than, have a protest for No Kings protest every 2 months. That's not doing it. They don't care. It's not effective.
Who doesn't care?
And,
I want to. You said two things. I want to respond to both of them. That second thing, who doesn't care?
Yes. The Republican Party won it, or Donald Trump.
They're not the audience.
Well, but they're in charge, and at this point, we need to be fighting back.
Yeah. So let me ask.
Sorry, go ahead there, Tom.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So the first thing you said was that you. I take it as a compliment. When you say. You say the kumbaya, I'm sick of the kumbaya, because they're not coming to the table. The modern right wing is not looking to compromise or cooperate. And I think in the main, you're roughly speaking right, unfortunately, right? The current constabulary, the current confederacy of the MAGA Republican Party is extending no olive branches. They are they see the left as the enemy, not as merely an adversary. And why would you work with your enemy? That said, where should we?
A domestic terrorist, I don't find much middle ground.
Yeah.
When you start calling me a domestic terrorist.
Yeah. So
where
do you, and so then you say
not a kumbaya type of phrase.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you say we've got to get angry. Where should that anger be directed? It doesn't have to be only at one place, and it's not a rhetorical question. Where do you think is the most strategic or more? Go ahead.
We
Oh, you cut out a little bit.
And our leader, I apologize. Our leadership, our Democratic leadership, can no longer just try to be nice. We have to be angry.
Right. No, but hold on. Where do you want, not just who you want to be angry. I hear you say, like, people who care about democracy, people who believe in climate change, people who want to fight for the middle class, people who care about poor people, like, those people should be willing to be angry. I get that. Where should that anger be directed?
Right now, I think it's Chuck Schumer.
All right, that's our disagreement. So here is where this is even. I think there could be grumpiness there for sure, but if you want to use anger as a motivator, Matthew, I'd think about directing your anger at the thing you genuinely want most to be defeated, not the imperfect ally, not the insufficiently strong or robust leader that or the leader, the absence of the leader we wish we had, but anger, the thing you're actually angry at. And
I agree. I agree. And I look at Chuck Schumer as a Chamberlain. Okay, there's a time and place for that. We need a Churchill. Okay, we need somebody to go to war with these Republicans, to war with them. Like, I literally mean that. Like, they need to fight everything. Every damn thing Donald Trump is doing, I want to see filibusters. I want to see people standing in the Senate well. I want to see us not giving them enough quorum to do their job. We need to fight any way we can. I don't care if it's, a governor delaying a flight of a congressman so they don't get a goddamn vote. I don't care what we have to do to make sure that they don't have enough people to do their job. And we need to start acting like that.
Yeah.
Because there isn't much time left. The clock is a running.
Yeah.
And
I want to let you finish your point, and then I want to reply.
Yeah. Yeah, we just need to fight harder.
Yeah.
We need to actually fight harder. That's my point.
Appreciate it, Matthew. So here is fight harder, get angry. I can't quibble with either of those things, really. Anger can be strategic. It is certainly morally justified. If we are quiet, if we don't stand up for anything, we ain't waking up in the morning. And fight harder. Yeah, sure. In fact, one of the things I think having a stronger, having a more strategic, even a little bit tougher pro-democracy movement, I think is pretty important. And we see it lots of times. I don't see it mostly, though, with our unwillingness to go after our own leaders. I don't think, if this is sort of, fight church, if this is sort of our chance to educate one another, if this is a chance for me to share at least the very best strategic input I have for us, if I'm speaking truth to power and you're the power, and one of the efforts, one of the objectives of that conversation, of that speaking, is to figure out what should be our operational principles, how we should either reinforce how we approach our work or how we should shift it. I would agree with being tough and being a little tougher. I would agree with being willing to access, yes, our compassion, but also our righteous indignation. I think that I would agree with that. I don't think as a movement, I don't think if we want to talk about the one political party that has a chance to represent the 25% of people who self-describe as progressive, 25%, by the way, is not enough to govern, then I don't think that that movement has an insufficient capacity to be angry at its own leadership or even its own coalition allies. I think it has demonstrated plenty of willingness, plenty of ability to be angry at its own coalition allies. Somebody can disagree with me. I'm not even saying it's unjustified. I don't think that's a weakness. There might be a weakness in our ability to sustain an anger or an anger overlapping set of responses or strategies pointed at blank, pointed at where the real subject of the ire is, not only the imperfect ally, but the thing that has to lose, the idea that has to lose, the power structure that has to change, the person in power who doesn't disagree with you 20% of the time but disagrees with you 80% of the time. That person in power who needs to lose. I think there are places for our movement to get better at, to get stronger at that. We go to Todd from, I think, Wisconsin. Go ahead, Todd.
Yes, I am from Wisconsin. Thank you, Jefferson. The last guy kind of just got me going a little bit. If he's still listening, run for office then. If you want him to be tougher, run for office.
Yeah.
But you got to realize, I'm a social democrat. I'm a Bernie Sanders type Democrat.
Yeah.
But I also have a few conservative leanings. You know, I guess you can call me old school social democrat. There's only so much they can do right now. They don't have control of either house. They don't have control of the judiciary, at least the Supreme Court, and they don't have control of the presidency. You know, you got to do what you can, but yes, talk tougher. That would be great. I agree with him on that, but run for office.
Yeah. No,
that's what you want.
I appreciate it, Todd, and I think that's, and I'd say more. In fact, I'd say yes and to what you said. Run for office, it's great. And I'd also say show up to protest on Saturday. I think it does make a difference. Makes a difference to the person standing next to you. Makes a difference to the global community. Makes a difference to the next person who might show up. If you get to 3.5%, we get to 12 million people, I think the country changes. That's what I think. I don't know if I wouldn't predict we get up to 12 million. I think we might be able to get to 8. Who knows? But I think we keep doing this every month. Every couple months, get 12 million, I think the country does change. But what else can we do? Where should we direct that anger? What's the most strategically beneficial thing to do? And that's sort of why this court sits.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Collecting those ways where we can channel constructive anger, and not just anger, also our compassion in ways that will actually make the world a little bit better rather than a lot worse. That's my biggest ask of all of us. Sandy, also from Wisconsin, you're on the air.
Hi. You're talking of treason. Has not Donald Trump caused treason with Russia, helping him all the time? And against
that is the accusation. That is the accusation.
Ukraine as well.
That is the accusation. And I can fall in my own trap where I can find myself angry at the former Democratic Attorney General for not acting more swiftly and more aggressively towards Donald Trump with respect to that and with respect to January 6th. And I can follow my own trap. And I realize when I bridge these topics of sort of righteous anger and treason that there's obvious psychological reason for that. and that's that betrayal hits harder. When somebody you think is supposed to be your friend hurts you, it hurts you more tenderly. It gets you in a more vulnerable space. You remember it more than when somebody that you don't trust, don't know, or that you already know that you can't trust hurts you. It hurts you more. And that's why I say I want my frontal lobes as much as possible to govern my anger. Not only because I want to be a better person, not as much of a jerk as I was in my younger life, not only because I just want to be a better human being, but also because I want us collectively to be more strategic. But back to your point, no, I think that's the and whether we can prove treason, right? There's an instinct in us to find the sharpest, shortest, meanest, most extreme word and go for it. And I'm not necessarily against that all the time. But I think what is absolutely true is that Trump has been anti-American in a number of really important ways. And that is something that is really worth saying. For people who supported him based on their love for this country, based on their idea that they wanted somebody who was going to stand up for what they love about this country, to recognize that that person in so many ways has been counter to the interests of this country. That's a critical argument to make. Last word for you, Sandy.
Nope. Just want him out until he's gone and hold my tongue. I hope I don't say the rude words that he said after Mr. Mueller passed away. What an asshole.
Yeah, it's and on that one, you guys know my song on this one. This is the kind of thing I think is worth saying to Republican allies, and I have a more full-throated thing I'll say this week to my Republican friends and our Republican listeners, which is hold them accountable. It's up to you. They ain't going to listen to me. Hold them accountable. The only thing I can do to hold them accountable is to try to beat them in elections. That's the only thing I can do, to try to urge some of you to try to beat them in elections. That's the only thing we can do. He's not going to listen to us. He's not going to listen to people who are his adversaries. But to the people who self-describe as Republicans, he might listen to you. And there's an obligation, I think, or at least have an opportunity. And I think that opportunity begets potentially responsibility to communicate, to hold to a set of standards, to say, hey, listen, let's treat our enemies a little bit differently than this. Let's hold ourselves to a higher standard than this. Because otherwise, the only level of accountability is for your guy, I don't mean you, Sandy, but for your guy to lose elections. And Republicans ought to hold their people accountable a little bit better than that. And that, to me, is maybe the greatest failure. That's not to say the Democratic Party's perfect. That's not to say that we've always held our people to account perfectly, but that track record is vastly different. There's been vastly higher degree of accountability within Democratic circles than the Republican Party has been willing to show to Donald Trump. And at some point, it's not all on every single Republican voter, but at some point, that's not only an opportunity, it is a responsibility. Thank you, Sandy, for your call.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. You know, Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew both took cash bribes while they were in the White House. Since then, you know, the Supreme Court, or at least 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court, made it a lot easier for politicians to take bribes with their Citizens United decision, which basically legalized political bribery as long as it's done through campaigns or PACs or super PACs. But for some people, there's just never enough money, right? Donald Trump has been running small-time hustles to make money for decades, selling sneakers, Bibles, steaks, vodka, water. But now he's hit the big time. He's got these fungible tokens, right? These fungible crypto assets, which are basically just digital pictures of Donald Trump that say, fight, fight, fight. And he has turned them into an $8 billion machine. His wife is in on this, too, with his Trump coin. It's a new way that foreign powers and billionaires in the United States can just shovel money into Donald Trump's pocket. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com titled Presidential Payola, The Evolution of Political Bribery. Check it out.
Back. Let's go straight to your calls, and let's do them briskly because at the top of the hour we got news with my dad. Greg, speed round for you from Somerville, South Carolina. You're on the air.
Yes, hello, Jefferson. I wanted to chime in with my 2 cents worth on the treason subject.
Go ahead.
first I wanted to talking about the definition of treason in general. And when I read that in the Constitution, treason against the U.S. consists only in levying war against them, or, I think that word or
is important.
Huge.
It's very important,
or in adhering to their enemies and giving them aid and comfort.
Yep.
And I think in there, it's just, okay, so who do you define as an enemy?
Yep.
And if you take the loosest term, in fact, I would argue go all the way back to the 2020 election. And if we know that Russia was interfering in that election, and we know that Trump covered up for him and made excuses for him after that, and arguably he was giving aid and comfort to our enemy.
Yep.
If they're interfering in our elections, I think that qualifies them as an enemy. I would argue that could be argued to be treason.
It absolutely could be argued, Greg, and thank you for the call. Michael from the Bronx, you're on the air.
Yes, I am. How are you?
Good.
Good, buddy. Yeah. So, first, let me start off with some despicable posts regarding Robert Mueller. He's glad he's dead. It's the military veteran. And this is how you treat military veterans? This has gone worse than him calling military veterans losers and suckers, but yet has the audacity to say, if you kneel during the national anthem, you're disrespecting our veterans.
Yeah.
That's the first hypocrisy right there. Now, the second hypocrisy, we all hear about the Save America Act.
Mm-hmm.
That is totally bogus because, once again, he's taking the word America and incorporating that into his name. Just
appreciate
hold on
it.
a second. All right.
Go ahead.
So,
Finish your thought, and then I want to go to Zamara.
Oh, because I was about to say is that the Save America Act is really the Save Donald Trump Act. Because if you recall, at the end of last year's... I'm sorry?
That's a good line. It's a good line. It has nothing. I just said it's a good line. The Save America Act, so-called, has nothing to do with saving America. It has to do with saving Donald Trump's power. It's a great point, Michael. I totally agree with you. Yep. I want to go to Zamara. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, from Rosemead, California. I know Rosemead.
Hi, it's Yomara, but that sounded fine too.
Yomara. Thank you, Yomara. I'll try to do better.
That's all right. Well, thanks for having me. I was just calling because I wanted to add to the conversation. I think, like a lot of people, I'm feeling a lot of anger right now. I'm in Los Angeles, so you can't imagine my gas prices.
Yeah.
But I just, I hear you describing Schumer and the Democrats as imperfect allies. And the 2 cents that I wanted to throw in is, the Democrats, it wasn't an accident that they lost this last election. And I think that's, when we talk about where to put our anger and how to direct our energy, I think we should put it at the Democrats and the Republicans collectively and abandon these two essentially dead parties. Like, I hear people discussing treason. Well, I want to get to the treason point. I do, when I hear people describing the treason, what I think they're getting at is the fact that our government has an obligation to represent and act in the interest of the people, and it's not doing it. It hasn't been doing that, and it's just so blatant. So maybe it's not treason under the criminal code, but it sure does feel like a dereliction of duty, from the words of our Declaration of Independence. It's not serving the people. It's abandoned its positions. So why should we keep putting our energy behind the Democrats, behind the Republicans? We need to put our energy elsewhere. I say this as a long...
Let me interrupt just a moment, Yamada. Where should we put it?
Building new parties, finding new leaders.
Do you have a favorite?
Right? People who are actually... I'm sorry?
Do you have a favorite?
No, I don't. I think we need something new. I haven't seen leadership from anybody running for office. Yeah. And because what I'm looking for, what I think leadership is somebody who's speaking the truth and giving us actual solutions. Like, I'm tired of hearing the talking points from the early 2000s. We're in 2026. Yeah. We need talking points and action plans that address our situation today, and no party is offering that. Like, why are we supporting a party that funded genocide, that did not act on the Epstein files? You know, like, I was in high school stomping for Barack Obama's primary campaign. Like, that's how lifelong I've been of a Democrat. I'm fairly young, so I've witnessed a lot. And, you know,
I want to give a 3-second response, Yamada, because we've got to go to break. On the why we support, I don't want to take that one because that would take me a little bit. But 2 quick things. Locally, I think there's actually real chances to do that. I think locally there are real chances to do that. Nationally, it's a bit trickier. The second big thing, I think there could be a major shift if we go through depression or something, but it would take a major, major shift.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Legacy of Secrecy, The Long Shadow of the JFK Assassination by Lamar Waldron and me. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963 triggered cover-ups by officials, this is from the introduction, by the way, that continue to negatively impact American politics, life, and foreign policy. Legacy of Secrecy details those cover-ups and hidden investigations, many for the first time, including the reasons they were carried out under such intense secrecy. Most were spawned by John and Robert Kennedy's top-secret 1963 plan to stage a coup against Fidel Castro, a plan so highly classified that it only started to be exposed in 2005 and is finally revealed in this book. Their own confessions now show the 3 mafia bosses, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and Johnny Roselli, were behind JFK's assassination. They used parts of the secret coup plan to kill JFK in a way that forced Attorney General Robert Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and high CIA official Richard Helms to withhold critical information not only from the public and the press, but also from each other and sometimes their own investigators. It's important to keep in mind that JFK was murdered just a year after the tense nuclear standoff during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The main goals of U.S. officials were to prevent a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets and to protect JFK's ally high up in the Cuban government, Commander Juan Almeida, head of the Cuban Army in 1963, still listed as Cuba's #3 official today. While U.S. leaders have managed to prevent a confrontation with Russia and preserve a critical ally in the Cuban government, this limited the investigation into JFK's murder, allowing the 3 mafia chiefs and their associates to remain free. As a result, the long shadow of secrecy surrounding both JFK's murder and the coup plan set the stage for the murder of Martin Luther King, ultimately driving 2 presidents from office and bringing about the murders of 5 congressional witnesses in the mid-1970s. Legacy of Secrecy breaks important new ground in key areas, detailing for the first time Louisiana godfather Carlos Marcello's clear confession to ordering JFK's assassination. Marcello's criminal empire ranged from Dallas to Memphis, and previously secret files at the National Archives have shown that he made this confession in 1985 to an FBI informant ruled credible by a federal judge as part of a secret FBI undercover sting operation named Camtex. Exposed here for the first time, Camtex yielded Marcello's admission that he'd met Lee Harvey Oswald and set Jack Ruby up in business in Dallas. The operation also generated hundreds of hours of heretofore secret prison audio tapes of Marcello discussing his crimes, recorded using the FBI informant's bugged transistor radio. Yet the FBI and Justice Department withheld most of that information from the public and Congress for years until its revelation in this book. Carlos Marcello wasn't the only mob boss who confessed his involvement in JFK's murder to a trusted associate. Legacy also uncovers important new information about Marcello's partners in JFK's assassination, Tampa godfather Santos Trafficante and Johnny Roselli, the Chicago Mafia's man in Las Vegas and Hollywood. Shortly before their deaths, both mobsters admitted their roles in JFK's murder to their attorneys. Two of their associates with documented ties to the secret JFK Almaheda coup plan likewise confessed. Using exclusive new information supported by FBI files apparently withheld from Congress, this book names two of the Georgia men who paid James Earl Ray to kill the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, white supremacist Joseph Miltier and Hugh R. Spake. Miltier, who had been involved in Marcello's murder of JFK, was part of a small clique of racists in Atlanta who used Marcello to broker the contract to murder Dr. King. We document James Earl Ray's ties to Marcello's heroin smuggling operation and long overlooked evidence in FBI files linking Ray to Marcello's associate, Johnny Roselli. Finally, this book explains why Ray, while fleeing to Canada the day after killing Dr. King in Memphis, made a 400-plus mile detour south to Atlanta, where he contacted Spake to get help from Miltier. In 1979, the last congressional committee to investigate the murders of JFK and Dr. King, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded, quote, that Trafficante, like Marcello, had the motive, means, and opportunity to assassinate President Kennedy, end of quote from the congressional report. The HSCA had been created in the wake of Roselli's sensational murder, but the HSCA was unable to establish direct evidence of Marcello's complicity. And the same was true for Trafficante and Roselli, because the CIA, FBI, and other federal agencies withheld so many relevant files. The HSCA, headed by civil rights figure Louis Stokes, also concluded there was a likelihood of conspiracy in the assassination of Dr. King and that financial gain was James Earl Ray's primary motivation. But they were unable to determine who had paid Ray or how the conspiracy had worked because the FBI and other agencies had hid critical files. With the help of more than 24 associates of John and Robert Kennedy, backed up by thousands of recently released documents at the National Archives, many of which are quoted here for the first time, Legacy tells the full story denied to Congress and the American people, legacy of secrecy.
We say fight back!
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Time for News with My Dad, a show where we talk about the news with my dad. And joining us live, playing the role of my dad, is in fact my dad, Joe Smith. Pop, how you doing?
Tell me you're hearing me.
I hear you. Do you have a shout out? In this program, we try to talk about the important stuff. Sometimes we talk about the unimportant stuff. When it's unimportant, we try to say so. Is there anything you want to shout out?
I have a shout out. I want to shout out for the Portland International Airport, PDX, because they have refused to put on their inside television monitors a propaganda film set out by the Trump folks blaming the lines at TSA on Democrats. They've said, no, we're not going to get involved in politics. Full disclosure, I am on the Community Advisory Committee for the Port of Portland, so perhaps I am unduly influenced in that shout-out today, but I am really proud of them.
No, it's... This is why we talked about it a bunch yesterday. This is why I love what my wife did. I recommend something like it for people to have their views heard when they're in these lines. To be clear, Democrats have put forth a clean fund TSA bill forward now multiple times, and the only reason Republicans won't do it is they want to make sure they can keep ICE officers, can I call them officers, agents, in masks. I mean, it's basically that simple. It's so important to them that they can have masked, brown-shirted thugs around the countryside that they're okay with people not being able to get to their destinations. Again, this is a show we talk about the news, talk about the important stuff. Dad, what is important, or if unimportant, still worth talking about?
It is, I know in the eternal scheme of things, is probably unimportant, but I want to just refer briefly to March Madness, and especially to the women. A week ago, I was sorry that I didn't have time to make my prediction, because the prediction is more certain now, but before March Madness began for the women, I predicted that the Final Four would be, which is unusual, would be all of the number one seeds.
Aha!
And
my
chalk. Prediction is looking better and better.
You think it's going to be chalk? You think there's not going to be any upsets, at least not at the highest levels?
Not at the highest level. When I see I am fascinated by what's happening with women's basketball, because the top teams are just getting better and better. There are still a lot of schools that don't have women's basketball, so there's just not the huge reservoir that there is on the men's side. But over time, there are more and more schools, I think, are going to adopt, because it's becoming more competitive. And these gals are really, really good. UConn is out of this world. But if I'm right on the Final Four, the last three games of the women are going to be not to miss.
So it is, of course, not typical that all number one seeds advance to all the way to the Final Four, but it is not that bold a prediction, because what it says is your prediction is the exact same as the selection committee's prediction. But do you have a prediction of who will emerge as the women's champion, as the NCAA champion for among those top four seeds?
Well, I think UConn is clearly the team to beat. Right. Nobody has beat them since last year.
Yeah. You think you keep it? All right. What's the next story? You and I haven't talked about Robert Mueller passing or Trump's response, but I don't know if you want to talk about that or something else first.
Let's talk about it since you mentioned it. And what I would suggest that you or maybe Tom should create a segment every day called DDT Depravity. DDT standing for, the middle D is Donald, the T is for Trump, the first D is despicable or deplorable or whatever, but then depravity, because here Robert Mueller, who was a huge disappointment as in the job that he did when he was appointed to investigate, he just dodged the most important issues, but nonetheless was a really high-quality public servant. And when he passes, what does Trump say? Good. Glad he's gone.
So
he's gone.
I want to say something about, so sure, Trump's response was despicable and venal and the kind of thing that I do believe the Republican Party should hold him to account for, the kind of thing that he should get public and private messages saying, you are our president. I don't mean mine. He is the country's president, of course. But for the people who voted for him, I think they have an opportunity. And over time, I think that opportunity gets closer to a responsibility to say, please, Mr. President, let's not set the example for the rest of the people in the country that is how people should behave. Please behave better than that. I think for me to say that, it doesn't, he doesn't care if I scold him, but I think there should be scolding from people who have purported to stand up for certain principles, including principles of conduct. That's what I'll say about that. But I want to say something to Yamada, and I'm hoping I'm doing the name better justice than I did before. It's a young caller who I think is still listening, and you are on my mind. I don't mean you, Dad. You are on my mind when I respond to this, because there is a justifiable distrust among the power structures in this country that for people who lived through the Korean War, say, maybe not lived through World War II, those folks are getting pretty darn old, but lived through the Korean War, lived through the Vietnam War, there are reasons to distrust institutions. But for the youngest generation, there are real reasons to distrust institutions, because at least until, let's call it 20 years ago, there was a reasonable expectation that the next generation would do better financially and do better in terms of sort of life stress, et cetera, than the generation prior. We had a 200-year record of that in this country, of bending the arc of history ever so slightly on occasion towards justice and giving people more opportunity generation to generation. And this past generation is the first or second generation where there hasn't been so, where we can't make that promise, where it doesn't look like that's happening. And I think about, and I'm not saying it's Robert Mueller's fault, but it is, when I was going to ask you what you think Robert Mueller's legacy is. And so I don't filibuster. I want to cue up what I'm going to say in response to that with that caller in mind, but Dad, and with that sort of bigger picture thing in mind, but I want to cue it up first, Dad, by asking you, what do you think Robert Mueller's legacy is?
His legacy, up until he was appointed as the special counsel, was really a very high standard of keeping the FBI out of politics, escaping from the legacy of J. Edgar Hoover, which was in many ways a terrible, terrible legacy. But after his appointment was one of, his legacy was of undue caution.
And here's the quick thing I want to say before we go to break, and I could spend a lot of time on it, but Robert Mueller was of a generation that it seemed like things were getting better, and as long as you stuck with, roughly speaking, the current institutions, if you didn't rock too many boats, if you tried to keep kind of things going all right, the things would probably get a little bit all right over time. That courage was required, but not inordinate courage. And I watched it when I went to my law school reunion, and I'm here at Harvard Law School, and all these people, and they're interviewing Rod Rosenstein, and there wasn't a single hard question asked, not only from the president of the law school, or dean of the law school, excuse me, who was interviewing him, but also from any student who was in the room. I was in an overflow room. I failed the test also, but I didn't have a microphone that would have been available to me. That there is so much of the current power structure that is so bought into the current power structure that we just don't have the small c constitutional habits to disrupt that power structure. And that's what I saw with Robert Mueller. He couldn't bring himself to be a Nazi fighter. He couldn't bring himself to really try to topple something that was hard to topple, because we've been in this habit, the older generation, this habit, we can just continue things, but we have to be willing to disrupt things now. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I asked that question, where are the most appropriate, where are the most strategic objects, places to direct our anger, where we can be most useful? Dad, feel free to respond, or next story.
Well, before I leave the idea of a segment that devotes itself to DDT depravity, I want to mention the gold coin that the hand-picked commission has said he wants to produce with his face on it, that he personally has improved the image. Almost certainly illegal, because it requires the approval of another bipartisan committee that he didn't appoint. But this guy, the only thing that is missing is Donald Trump is watching you posters. And people who have read 1984 will understand the significance of that.
No, if you were to listen to the modern conservative movement, they would make the case that their primary texts, I would say they often make the case their primary texts are the Holy Bible, including the Ten Commandments, and the United States Constitution. We're all hypocrites, myself included, so I have to offer any opinion I offer with humility, including this one. But that has become organized at scale hypocrisy. That the current President of the United States, what makes him different, what makes him garner extra attention, what makes him special, tends to at least overlap very frequently. I'm not going to say most of the time because I'd need to do a mathematical arithmetical count that I have not made. But in a significant number of times when he is cutting against, at the same time, at least one or the other, at least the Bible, including the Ten Commandments, or the U.S. Constitution, or both. This is a place where he's violating both, where he's cutting against the role of the executive and doing it to create a graven image. It's the second commandment, Exodus 24-6. It is violating the rule against idolatry to make an idol of himself so his supporters can worship an idol of him, and doing it in contravention of the principles and constitutional principles of this country. I don't buy that these are their sacred texts. I buy that for this movement, they have been methods of convenience to try to build power, to try to have rhetorical flourishes around the kind of power they would like to wield and try to hold over others. And it is a wonderful example, or maybe I mean a terrible example, of them violating both. Pop, response, or next story?
Courts. Lots happening in the courts, some good, some not so good, and some awful. The conversation yesterday from the Supreme Court that they may say you cannot use postmark as the deadline for voting is absolutely awful. And I'm troubled that apparently the defense didn't bring up the constitutional question. I have always felt that there really was a constitutional issue when you when you allowed people who lived within a couple of miles or even a few blocks of a voting box to cast their ballot. As somebody, a rural farmer who might live 50 miles from the nearest post office, that it was not fair for them, and really an unconstitutional discrimination against rural voters to require in-person voting when mail voting, particularly postmark mail voting, was available to people in town. Nobody raised that, but that is just so bad.
No, bad decision. There's been a war on democracy and a war on voting that's been going on for a while, and it's only more obvious now. I'm getting a little bit fired up. We'll be right back after this.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. It's no coincidence that the time in Europe when the church ran the continent, from around the 5th century to around the 15th or 16th century, that 1,000-year period is referred to as the Dark Ages. This is what happens when religion controls politics, when religion controls the state, the nation. And every nation in Europe was controlled essentially by the Catholic Church during that period of time. It got busted up with the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. This was what the founders of this country very much knew about. George Washington refused to declare himself a Christian. Thomas Paine wrote an entire book embracing atheism. Ben Franklin fled Massachusetts as a teenager to escape the religious threats. And Thomas Jefferson went off on it regularly. There's a whole piece about how the Republicans are trying to impose a new dark age on America. It's all laid out, all the quotes and all the links over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
You listen to the Thom Hartmann program. I am Jeff. This is News with My Dad, a show we talk about the news with my dad. On the air is, in fact, my dad. Pop, next story.
More court stuff. SCOTUS also once again confirmed the concept of qualified immunity for police officers, which I think is crap, but some good decisions. Federal Judge Mustafa Kasubuha told RFK that his agency cannot withhold money from hospitals and clinics just because they provide gender-affirming care. So Luce said something about keep reining in the growing attempt of everything Trump is to impose federal power. Judge Michael Simon locally told ICE that they cannot use pepper balls and other munitions against protesters unless there is an imminent threat of physical harm. And even then, if they do see physical harm, they can't aim at anywhere above the waist unless deadly force is, under current policy, available. Trump is, of course, going to appeal that. The very proud, and the Pentagon, Department of Defense, was told that they cannot keep New York Times reporters out. And so what did Hegseth do today? He decided that the way to address the court ruling that it was unconstitutional to let only toadies from the media, toadies who toady up to Trump, in, they decided to close the corridor in the Pentagon, which has been there for decades, for reporters, moving them to a building outside and requiring them to be escorted in so they cannot roam and ask questions. Just clearly violates the spirit of the court ruling, and I think the letter of the court ruling. And this is the administration that Trump said was going to be so transparent. Depravity, depravity, depravity.
All right, Pop. Is there, you and I haven't talked recently, and we don't need to dwell on it too much if you don't want to. We haven't dwelled much recently on the Iran invasion. How do you think this thing wraps up? We know that Trump made a big hullabaloo, I don't know, big announcement. Like, I'm having great talks. We might be close to the end, because we know he watches daily polling reports, and he knows this thing ain't polling great. And then the very next day, Iran bombs Israel. Maybe the talks weren't going quite as good as he suggested. Do you have any thoughts about how this thing wraps up? You think it goes on and on and on? You think that they get it buttoned up?
I have lots of thoughts. He has a tiger by the tail. He can't let it go, because if he lets it go, Iran continues to do all the awful stuff. But he can't hold onto it without really bad stuff happening both around the world and here. The Strait of Hormuz stuff is the classic example. I have to chuckle. Hegseth said there's really no problem with the Strait of Hormuz. It's just that Iran is shooting its ships, which has to be maybe the silliest comment imaginable from
Mrs. Lincoln, how
the
was the
Secretary of Defense.
Yeah.
Oh, the big question, he announced that we were going to attack the oil fields if they didn't do what he wants with the straits as of yesterday. Yesterday he said, oh, well, now we're talking so we can postpone the deadline to Friday. What really happened, of course, was that Iran said, you do that to us, and boy, guess what we will do to all of the Middle East oil fields. And I suspect, I would be willing to bet, as a matter of fact, that there were frantic calls from many countries to their counterparts in the United States saying, please don't let him do that. But he has started something that he doesn't know how to stop.
Yeah. So we've got to do a straw in the wind in a second. But what I will say is, Iran has no particular incentive to stop. We had a caller on Monday, or maybe it was late last week, who said, this is not that surprising. The Project for New American Century has wanted to attack Iran for decades. We all remember bomb Iran from John McCain. Multiple presidents, multiple departments of defense, now Department of War, have looked at this, knowing that Iran was not a good actor, various bellicose people wanting to invade or attack, and each time they decided not to, and it's because it ain't that easy. Right? It doesn't mean Iran is good or benevolent, it means it ain't that easy. And when you have a president who is impulsive, whose motivations aren't about objectives that are accomplishable for the benefit of other people, when he doesn't really think things through, when he doesn't do real discussion and real analysis, when they don't have sort of a policy shop to speak of, this is the kind of thing that happens. I don't have a particular prediction, but I don't disagree with yours. Dad, you have a quick straw in the wind for 5 seconds?
I have a straw in the wind, which I wish were not, but I'm afraid is a straw in the wind. Boeing has just been contracted by Israel to deliver about 5,000 smart bombs to Israel.
Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Love you, Pop. It's good talking to you.
Good to talk to you. Talk to you Thursday.
We'll be back with your calls right after this, and I hope to get back with you, Yamada.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Crusaders, The Epic History of the Wars for the Holy Lands by New York Times bestselling author Dan Jones. This is from chapter 1. It begins the book, The Count and the Imam. Count Roger of Sicily lifted his leg and farted. "By the truth of my religion," he exclaimed, "there is more use in that than in what you are here to say." His advisors stood chastened and a little perplexed. The Count before them was in his late 40s and salted to his bones with the experience of military campaigning in southern Italy and the islands of the central Mediterranean. As a young warrior, he had been described by one flatterer as tall and well-made, a most fluent speaker, shrewd in counsel, far-sighted in the planning of things to be done, cheerful and pleasant to everyone. In middle age, he had hardened somewhat and was not one to waste his words on fools. The plan the advisors had recommended had seemed like a good one, as courtiers' plans very often do, before they are shredded by the critiques of short-tempered potentates. Not far across the sea from Sicily, roughly 75 miles at the closest point, lay the remains of what had in ancient times been called Carthage, afterward the Roman province of Africa, and now in the 11th century, Ifriqiya. Its cities, including the capital Mahdia and on the coast, and Kairoun Island, where a vast mosque and school had for many generations been frequented by the greatest philosophers and natural scientists in North Africa, were under the shaky command of a crumbling dynasty of Berber Muslims known as the Zirids. The countryside was controlled by various Arab Bedouin tribes sent from Egypt to drive the Zirids out. Political stability was collapsing. Here lay warm and fertile farmlands. There sat prosperous port towns, all ripe for the taking. Roger's counselors thought so, and they had therefore recommended to their testy overlord the proposal of a cousin whom one source names only as Baldwin. This Baldwin had come into possession of a great army of Christian soldiers and was casting around for somewhere godless to conquer. He had asked Roger's blessing to come to Sicily and use it as a launch pad for an invasion of Irafiqua. "I shall be a neighbor of yours," he had explained, as though this were good news. But Roger of Sicily was not feeling neighborly. Irafiqua was undoubtedly ruled by various followers of Islam, he said, but those infidels happened to be sworn partners of the Sicilians in agreements that kept the peace and allowed for a rich exchange of goods in the island's markets and ports. The last thing he wanted, he ranted to his gathered minions, was a cousin imposing on his hospitality, waging a reckless war that would disrupt Sicilian trade if it was successful, and cost him a lot of money in military support if it failed. Irafiqua may indeed have been vulnerable, but if anyone was going to exploit that, it was going to be Roger himself. He had spent the last 2.5 decades, almost his entire adult life, carving out his rule in the region, and it would have been a limp end indeed if he were now to put it at risk, that pursuit of, to put it at risk in pursuit of some harebrained scheme cooked up by a kinsman who had never troubled the soil of the island with his sweat. If this Baldwin wanted to fight Muslims, said Roger, he would have to find a different part of the Mediterranean in which to go about his business. There were plenty of places he could name that would be preferable to Sicily's backyard. He summoned Baldwin's personal envoy to his presence and informed him of his decisions. If his master was really serious, he said, then the best way to proceed is to conquer Jerusalem. That is how it all began. Roger, Count of Sicily, was 11th century Europe's ultimate self-made man. He was born around the year 1040 as the youngest of 12 sons sired by a minor nobleman from Normandy called Tancred of Hauteville. Given the protocols of inheritance, being born even as a second son implied a lifelong burden of fortune hunting rather than easy inheritance. To have 11 brothers ahead of you was a disaster. But by the end of the century, the Normans had begun to conquer their way around Western Europe. They took command of Saxon England in 1066. At the same time, southern Italy fell under their gaze, and opportunities that may have seemed limited for younger sons within Normandy itself, but for anyone prepared to travel, opportunity abounded. As a young man, therefore, Roger had left his homeland in what is now northwest France and set out for territory that already called many of his kinsmen and countrymen, the rich but unstable southern Italian regions of Calabria and Apulia. Toe and heel of the Italian boot, Calabria and Apulia were lands where resources were plentiful, authority was contested, and an ambitious young man with a yen for politics and warfare might make his name. Other Normans of the Hauteville clan had already found success here, fighting against the rival superpowers in the region, principally the Byzantine Greeks and Roman popes, both of whom regarded the Normans with suspicion bordering on alarm. The book Crusaders, The Epic History of the Wars for the Holy Lands by Dan Jones.
Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out.
And we are back. I want to go back to a caller who waited patiently, who called in, and who is part of an audience I find critical, which is who is going to pick up the mantle for democracy, for pro-social policies, for humanity, for compassion, for truth, for our hopes for this country, for the redemption story that I believe and hope the United States to be. And that absolutely includes the torch carriers and torch bearers and torch passers, that are my dad's generation and the generation below my dad's generation, and also needs to be the generations that are coming after me. That we are torch carriers and torch passers to them, and we have to be listening to and be in dialogue across generations. And it is a timeless question. I remember it from, yes, the beginnings of the 2000s. I remember it when Ralph Nader ran for president. I remember it probably almost every time I have the privilege of sitting in here, which is to what degree we should aim our anger at the party that feels like it does an insufficient job of leading a pro-democracy coalition in a first-past-the-post majoritarian system, and how much it should be directed elsewhere. And I wanted to give Yamada, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, a chance to make her point, but also I really wanted to respond, have a little bit of a dialogue. I won't be able to spend the whole show on it, but I didn't want to just leave her hanging. Yamada from Rosemead, are you back with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, you first. I want to make sure I capture any thoughts you had, or give you a chance to say a quick thing. But I wanted a chance to respond. But go ahead, you first.
Yeah, look. We can't pretend the Democrats and the Republicans are offering anything. You know, there was a caller earlier, saying there's nothing the Democrats can do right now. They don't have the House, they don't have the seats, they don't have the power. Well, they didn't do anything when they did have the power. Mm-hmm. In fact, when we're talking about the war in Iran, the U.S. has no moral standing over any other country. Literally, our government is being run by pedophiles, and no one else has been arrested. No one else is being investigated seriously. And it's shocking that it took the Republicans coming into office for these files to be released. The Democrats could not even stop funding a genocide in another country. We have no moral standing. Our government, from the perspective of a 34-year-old, is completely illegitimate. From the Supreme Court, who also has sexual harm doers on it, to our Congress, who gets wealthy with the insider information they have, to the presidency. They're completely an illegitimate government, and it is made up of Democrats and Republicans. And if we want a country that works for the working class people in here, who works for the everyday masses, that is actually invested in the welfare of its people, we have to look elsewhere than the Democrats and the Republicans.
It's well stated, and I want to respond. I'll start with a question. I did this before our last segment. I asked you sort of where, and you said which party, and you said, I'm not sure it needs to be a new party. I hear that. I wanted to give you some response. And to answer my own question of where should we look? Okay, I think you, and I will speak directly to you, have somewhere between 3 and 5 choices. And it's totally up to you. It's totally up to each of us what we choose. The bird is in your hands, as Jerry Spence would say. I find a couple of those more strategically persuasive for me personally, and when I have a chance to advocate and teach and engage activists. And before you and I ever knew each other, what I was doing when I was 34 was engaging the next generation in pro-democracy activism. That was my full-time gig. It wasn't a very well-paid gig. In fact, for a couple of years, it was a totally unpaid gig. And it was mostly thankless, and it was still the most important work I ever did, and probably that I will ever do in my life. So these topics are near and dear to my heart, as near and dear to my heart as just about anything in the world. Here's what I think the choices are, in no particular order. One choice is to disengage. You have not suggested that nor threatened it. Another is to I put a sort of random category, sort of a miscellaneous category, any number of maybe unstrategic but nonetheless active responses other than disengage. I'll put that in a big category. That would be choice 2. Here are 3 others. There is I do think, and we even saw recently, I think that's happening in Los Angeles, where I think, is Rosemead in LA County?
It is.
Yeah. So I think it happened in Los Angeles. It certainly happened in New York City recently, where there are chances for social democrats, for democratic socialists, for Green Party members. I'm reminded when I visited Italy, I won't tell the whole story, when I visited Florence, it's my best travel story. If I haven't told it before, I should tell it on the air, but I don't want to chew up all your time telling it right now. But I was in the middle of the story, towards the end of the story, I was brought to watch a city council meeting in Florence. And my tour guide, it was sort of this tour guide to the stars. I was not a star, to be clear. but that's who this person was, brought me to this meeting. And I got to watch. I said, well, what can you tell me about the chamber here? And it was a big, like there were 45 members. I should look it up, but it looked to me like a legislature. It was a big city council, not like my town at the time had 5 city councilors. They had, over a few dozen. And I said, what can you tell me about it? He said, well, you have the majority coalition and you have the opposition party. And I say, well, what can you tell me about the majority coalition? And he said, well, you got your Democrats, and they're a little more liberal than your Democrats, as Florence said, he's a little more liberal than your Democrats in the United States. And he said, and then you have your Greens. And then he said, and then you have your real liberals. That's how he put the governing coalition in Florence, Italy, right? You had leftier Democrats plus Greens plus what he described as sort of the real liberals. He meant sort of the more lefties. I think in urban areas, there might be some suburban areas, et cetera, around the country, but I think primarily in urban areas around the country, there are chances, we're seeing that, to advocate for somebody and for even the building of infrastructure, for apparatus, for party structure, et cetera, that is not just big D Democrat. And to people who are Democratic Party members or Democratic Party leaders, you should listen to that and heed it. And voters like Yamada should be on your mind, because if you want a governing coalition in this country, it probably has got to include the Yamadas of the world. All right, that's the third move, is go local. Fourth move is, these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Well, some of these are definitely not mutually exclusive. Fourth move, it seems to me, and you can respond or tell me to jump in the lake, whatever you want. Fourth move is there might be a chance, and the way I've looked at big picture history over the last while is I've cited to the progressive era of 100 years ago, now 110 years ago, 115 years ago, almost 120 years ago, that when we were moving from an agrarian age into an industrial age, and there was a significant shift of what needed to happen with our power structure, with our economics, and with our politics, and it happened. And it happened with the evolution of the Republican Party, the evolution of the Democratic Party, and then eventually, some decades later, even a flip of what even those parties stood for. It didn't all happen right then. The platform of the Progressive Party 120 years ago did not entirely manifest itself in Woodrow Wilson or in Teddy Roosevelt. It kept going until even the New Deal later on, after a cataclysmic economic event, after a Great Depression. I think if we're on track for that, and that would be off track of anything good, but if we're on track for that, I genuinely think there might be an opportunity, and I don't mean that with glee or hope, but there might be an opportunity or a necessity or a window for meaningful cataclysmic change in political party structures over the next, let's call it 5 to 20 years, 3 to 20 years. I think that is a realistic possibility. Let me give you my fifth. And that fifth one, and I'm not advocating for this one only, but the fifth one is to recognize, not mutually exclusively waiting for that moment, and not mutually exclusively from working locally where there actually can be new infrastructure, new apparatus, and that is to work for a governing coalition party, because we aren't in Italy. We do have a first past the post system, to work for a party that is slightly less bad. And I don't mean lesser of two evils. I mean, that's what we're at. 25% of the country self-describes as progressive. If we're in a majoritarian government, they don't get to decide unless they build that 25% to something closer to 50%. And if they can run a coalition government that actually can coalesce a majority of the country, unless we don't want democracy, which I think we do. So that's sort of the work within strategy. I don't think those are mutually exclusive, but I do think those are the 5 choices. Disengage, do something maybe even more destructive than disengaging, work locally, wait for a big moment, or work within. Feel free to respond. Tell me your quibbles. Where do you miss? Yeah. Or go ahead.
Well, I think, one, there's a premise we disagree on that I'll highlight, and then there's a vacuum that I think you're not considering in your analysis.
Great.
And I'll start my response by rooting it back in, what callers were talking about earlier with treason. Our Declaration of Independence doesn't say what the government no longer serves or meets the interests of the people, vote differently. That's not what the Declaration of Independence asks of its people to do in holding its government accountable. So the premise that I think that I'm pointing out is...
Hold on a second. I'm sticking with you. Hold on just one second.
For audio and video archives.
We'll be right back and listen to Tom's Show. I'm Jeff. Yamada, identify the premise where you think we disagree or where we don't see eye to eye. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're still talking about our elections as if they're legitimate. Like, you're considering folks who are not voting maybe as disengaged, but I think those are folks who no longer consider voting legitimate. We're in a post-Citizens United world where money is impacting elections in a very real way. And we've just, people are talking about the SAVE Act. We've had voter suppression happening at high levels already.
My question is, what do you want to do? Like I put that in sort of that second miscellaneous category where I think you might go, which I don't disregard. But what if we say, okay, government is illegitimate? What's the move? What are you advocating for?
I think that's where I get to the vacuum that I think you're not considering. Yes, our government and the ruling elite have a lot of power, but the power they've shown us that they don't have is to keep our people alive. We've had...
let's say I concede that. Let me just say I just concede that, Yamada. What is your move? What do you strategically recommend?
There are essentially dual power. There are groups locally who are meeting people's needs, who are helping people stay housed, who are feeding people after disasters.
Amen.
The government can't do it. Right? So I think we need to abandon any local leader, right, that has a moral compass and has integrity should leave the Democratic Party, and that local energy to form a new party. But it's going to require abandoning our current decrepit, corrupt institutions.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if we disagree on the premise or if we see the vacuum. I do think when I say work locally, I should clarify. I don't mean work locally only electorally. So we don't know each other very well. But my own push for what I would like to see, what I'm even pushing for in my town, is for citizen juries, is even for not just elected officials, not just working through processes of fundraising and vote getting to wield power, but even trying to empower people more directly to be able to a little bit less filtered by a money and power system to try to answer questions better. And I love your move, absolutely love your move of working locally, not only in the hopes that elected leaders will solve problems, but actually work communally to solve problems directly, because that builds sort of power structures, not only beholden to elected power structures or to existing corporate power structures, that build new power structures. Not only yes, but hell yes to that. Where I do think we quibble is I still think electoral power structures exist, and I don't want to deny them. I don't want to pretend they don't. I only want to walk away from those and hope that they do better or think they're going to care if I leave. I do think constructive engagement is a morally justifiable and sometimes even morally recommended or almost morally required sort of strategy, even in an era of almost unfettered corruption, which I don't think we disagree much with that. But last word for you.
I just think that, at this point, it's morally compromising to cast a vote for a Democrat or a Republican. And so if I want to live a morally righteous life, I cannot participate in either of those systems.
So I hope you'll, I appreciate that. And I hope you'll stay listening, because I think this is one of the most important questions there is. I believe, and a philosopher better than I should write on it, but I believe it is deeply morally justified to work within a compromised system while one works to improve it. And I can understand somebody saying, "No, I gotta move to Walden Pond and theorize, or I've got to go help 6 people I can genuinely help, rather than spend time and effort and money on something that I have a hard time trusting." I get that, but Yamada, I stuck with it a long time. Thank you for sticking with me.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, "Give unto Caesar what is Caesar, and onto God what is God's. This is the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said the only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
We're back. Let's go to your calls. We appreciate them. Let's go to Phil. Wins the most patient listener award. Thank you, Phil.
Hello, Jefferson. Can you hear me good?
Yep.
Here's my comment for response. We're having these problems because we're violating the Clean Air and Water Acts. What say you?
We're having, and when you say these problems, which problems do you mean?
Well, let's just start with what the Clean Air and Water Act represents. The problems are stemmed from...
No, when you say these problems, what do you mean these problems? There's a lot of problems.
War? Yeah, well, there is. And
you mean every single problem or a particular subset of every single problem?
Well, I should really make this simpler to understand. We're saying we're at war over oil, right?
Okay.
So everything we're doing involves using oil, generally.
Okay.
Which means heavy equipment, machines. Otherwise, you don't need the oil.
Yeah.
So Charles Dickens pointed this out in his book in the 1800s, movie we watched during Christmas called The Christmas Carol.
Yep.
And Ebenezer's a nice guy in the beginning. Why? He works for a company that's not burning oil. Basically, doing things in a mechanized manner, but not with machines. And I don't know if people don't seem to realize that when the corporate man comes in to buy him out, he says specifically he represents the vested interests, the factories, the machines.
Yeah. Connect the dots for me.
Yeah, so the Luddites were complaining about all the pollution created.
Okay.
Well, that was actually in violation of rules that Nixon set up, the Clean Air and Water Act.
Okay.
So I've been watching this unfold since the 50s. The first suburbia is where I lived, Levittown, and then it developed into where we are today. As a green architect, the first thing I learned was density.
Hold on, I gotta try to get to a place of sharpness. I gotta try to get to a point that I can either understand, respond to, or move to the next one.
Yeah, you have to respond to this. So we're in violation of rules that would control our oil use. And that's just basically air and water, and no one talks about that. And that involves real estate.
Got it. So your point,
especially the automobile.
Your point was that we're violating the Clean Air and Water Act, and there's a lot of things downstream for that. In fact, you even connect it downstream, pun intended, to our engagement in foreign military exercise.
Bingo. That's what's allowing us to have, luxury cars and big houses and a lot. So really, we are fighting kind of a losing battle unless you start retracting the intrusiveness. Indians summed it up. What you do to the earth, you do to yourself. Yeah. So we need to understand that. It's an environmental statement. It's a climate change issue that, it's hard to bring up when you're launching missiles everywhere. Yeah. But I'll tell you what the big solution that no one sees yet, and I'll leave this with you. The e-bike revolution.
Yeah.
That's the solution, because you're going from the car to the e-bike. That's the transition we need to.
For anybody who thinks what Phil said was just cute, Phil, I actually agree with you. I actually think that technology has been the technology that should have spread more. Had we embraced that technology prior to the Interstate Highway Act, had we embraced that technology, let's call it some number of decades before every sort of road and pre-bike lanes, so you actually had protected bike lanes, not just with stripes, it was something better than stripes. I think already we'd be in a better position internationally. I think we'd better position economically. I think we'd better position, in terms of public safety. I actually think e-bikes are a wonder drug. I think you're right, man. I think you're right.
It's just a transition. And
that's the hard part. We have so many roads already built, right? I saw something the other day that I thought was really great. It was, or really horrible, I don't know, but it was notable. that it showed, that's probably an AI-generated image, but it showed a group of kids walking down the street, protected from cars, only with some dashed lines, and said, if people were walking, if kids were walking, would you think that you should protect them only with a dashed line, only with paint? Or would you actually create some barrier, at least a curb, something else to separate them from traffic? And looking at it as like, oh yeah, I'm so used to thinking that a bicycle should have to share a lane or kind of hug over to the right from an automobile that it didn't even occur to me how absurd it is. I would never think that of somebody on foot, and somebody on foot has basically the same level of protection, minus maybe a helmet, as somebody on a bicycle. But the transition to go from, to actually create the kinds of safe bike lanes that will be suitable for large numbers of bicycle riders, that's sort of the hard part. But I do think more and more people who use what I'm calling a wonder drug, and it's your fault, you brought it up, to start using more and more e-bikes. I think then city planners will, go where the traffic is, and we can push for city planners to make it safer, so there will be even more demand for that bike infrastructure. Boy, howdy, Phil, it's a big thing. It seems like a little thing, but it's the kind of thing locally. Whatever you think about national politics, that is something worth working towards. It would impact so many things downstream. I totally agree, my friend.
Thank you, Jefferson. Thank you.
Be well. If the good people think it's morally reprehensible to get engaged in the current system, will it just be left to even more and more of the bad people? I guess that's my concern.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Today we're reading The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio. This is from the first chapter. For decades, Pence had presented himself as a humble servant who could be entrusted with power because he was at heart a mild-mannered Midwesterner. Friends and foes alike said his major character trait was extreme niceness. When given the opportunity, Pence described himself as a true Hoosier, son of Indiana, who was a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. This is how he had introduced himself to the country at the Republican National Convention 6 months earlier. The list contrasted with the usual pledge politicians make to put country first. This is what President Obama did after the 2016 election, when he said, "We are not Democrats first, we are not Republicans first, we are Americans first." The vice president's self-declared identity revealed both his priorities and the source of his power. For 30 years, he had helped lead the Republican Party into a closer alliance with preachers who were turning evangelical Christianity from a religion into a political crusade that engaged in a culture war with non-believers. The aim of many was to destroy abortion rights, roll back the equality gained by gay citizens, and prepare the nation for the second coming of Christ. Pence and others used martial metaphors and considered themselves warriors of the Christian right, both besieged and called upon to fight. Quote, "Those who would have us ignore the battle being fought over life, marriage, and religious liberty have forgotten the lessons of history," said Pence in 2010. "America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments trumped moral principles." Pence's allies in his war included hugely wealthy donors who, despite their vast wealth accumulated at a time of historic inequality, also posed as victims. As libertarians in the mold of Ayn Rand's cardboard characters, they felt inhibited in the pursuit of even greater riches by a government that imposed foolish regulations and would redistribute their wealth to the supposedly indolent poor. Starting with this perspective, they denied the science behind environmental protection, demanded tax cuts for themselves, and insisted on massive reductions in programs serving anyone who wasn't rich. The victimhood claimed by both the libertarians and the Christian right permitted the construction of an alternative reality that denied their own power and masked their ambition to make politics and culture conform to an ideology that included white Christian supremacy and predatory capitalism. It also denied the progress they had made in their construction of their own political might. With his oath of office, Vice President Pence became both the free marketer's hero and the most successful Christian supremacist in American history. Most of Pence's life had been preparation for this moment, and possibly one more. His lifelong goal, set when he was a boy, was the Oval Office itself. Remarkably, he had reached this point by tying his fate to Donald J. Trump, a man whose immorality in the form of lying, cheating, and deceiving in every aspect of his life, from his marriage to his businesses, had made him a living exemplar of everything that Christianity and conservatism abhorred. However, this record also suggested that Pence was more likely to assume the highest office in the land than most vice presidents who had come before. To put it bluntly, Trump was vulnerable to impeachment. If this occurred, Pence would see the hand of God at work in his elevation to the presidency. In the meantime, he would wait and watch. On Inauguration Day, with Pence looking on, a slightly stooped Donald Trump stepped forward when it was his turn to face the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Beside Trump stood his wife, Melania, the former fashion model, who held two Bibles, Lincoln's and Trump's own. At the stroke of noon, the president-elect raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bibles. As he did this, Trump's family members and hundreds of political and government figures strained to see the moment. Trump and Pence were a study in contrasts. At age 58, Pence appeared trim, perhaps even athletic, and could have passed for a man 10 years younger. His jacket was neatly buttoned, his hands were clasped at his waist, and his smooth face was set in a half smile. Mere feet away, in sum, he resembled a small-town pastor, or maybe even a funeral director. Mere feet away, a stern-faced 70-year-old Trump stood with his coat hanging open like a caftan to reveal a long red necktie. Despite much cosmetic intervention, he looked old and tired. At the conclusion of the presidential oath, which had been voiced by 44 presidents before him, Trump said the words, "So help me God," and accepted the congratulations of those closest to him with a thin-lipped, toothless grin. He then delivered a 15-minute speech replete with distortions and falsehoods that were his trademark. He declared that America was awash with crime and despair and under constant attack. "This American carnage stops right here and stops right now," said Trump. It was the most remembered phrase of the address. "That was some weird S-word," former President George W. Bush was heard to remark as he left the inaugural stand. Weird was the mildest word that one could attach to the 45th President of the United States as he launched an administration that would be stained by scandal and corruption so broad it defied a citizen's ability to grasp. Cronyism, secrecy, and nepotism would flourish. Presidential lies, daily cataloged by the Washington Post and others, would come at the rate of more than 150 per month. From the moment of his oath, Mike Pence, the vice president, faced the historic, some would say daunting, challenge of dealing with an erratic and undisciplined commander-in-chief. The book, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence.
We say fight back!
is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. The textbook way to do a show like this is to start an hour with some element, attempt at wisdom or provocation that cues up the community to respond to the wisdom or the provocation that is offered. I already know that this community is pulsating with wisdom at this very moment. I need not provoke that wisdom further. I need merely unleash it. And with that, I'm going to go to Wendy from Tacoma, Washington. Wendy, you're on the air.
Hi, Jefferson. I've never called before, but I felt compelled to call about the young woman you spoke to earlier. I listened to her argument, and I agree with 99% of what she says. And yes, many of the politicians at the top running our country are not only corrupt, but also pedophiles. But I would argue that your moral imperative is to vote. And I would say this based on the fact that in the 2024 election, there were more people that didn't vote than did. And if all of the eligible voters in this country were informed enough and morally righteous enough to make sure they voted, and that they voted for people they could believe in, we would not be in the mess that we are in now.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate the call. I can't add much. I want to go to Vivian from Seattle, Washington. You're on the air.
Hi, Jefferson. I want to fundamentally disagree with the previous caller who suggested that we abandon the Democratic Party, especially now. We are months away from the most consequential election this nation's ever faced. The political winds at our sails, and any Republican listening to that suggestion will be popping corks. We need to do the polar opposite. Progressives need to occupy the Democratic Party, take it over the way the Tea Party took over the GOP. There's roughly 100 members of the Congressional Democratic Progressive Caucus. It's been growing. It's never been this large. Leaving the Democratic Party, trying to start a third party, would leave the Republican Party twice as large as those two parties, essentially guaranteeing Republicans winning elections for the foreseeable future. It's just political suicide, in my opinion, and I know it's coming from a good spot.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it very much. And what I want to say is I want to honor, here's what I would say. The people who are willing to engage that question, who with love and curiosity and humility and morality, the people who think that power should be wielded not for the end of power itself, but for the advancement of love and curiosity and humility and morality, to advance some moral, ethical, legitimate standard, who are even willing to think that way, those people should probably wield a little bit more power. Those people should probably wield a little bit more power. And so selfishly, but also as an advocate for some sort of pro-democracy movement by whatever brand, under whatever umbrella, who, for too many of those people to sideline themselves, that's my worry. That's my moral worry, not just my strategic worry, my moral worry, my strategic recommendation. And my moral recommendation is just pick something. Pick something to work on. It's not about sidelining or even picking a side, but ultimately with all your time, but pick something. Start working on something. Start working on water policy, it was called. Start working on, as you were saying, building local community who will directly help homeless communities experiencing houselessness. Work directly on democracy reforms. Work directly on helping victims. Work directly on money in politics. Work directly on changing systems of improving systems of voting. Work directly on those, and be willing to work with allies who will advance those objectives. When I've seen people be able to proceed both morally and strategically, it's usually because they're able to pick something and work like heck at it. Let's go to Jesse from Rochester, I think Minnesota. Go ahead, Jesse.
Hey, Jefferson. Thanks for carrying the torch when Tom is gone. I can speak for many of us out there. We truly appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
I am calling regarding the two callers that we had earlier, basically saying the same thing, that, we need to start a voting third party. And it prompted me to call. I think maybe I called 20 years ago to Tom. But I had to say, first off, I've heard this argument for 20 years that, the Republicans and the Democrats are the same. They are not. This is a false equivalency argument. This is a tactic used by Republicans. We are not comparing apples to apples. And so I just find that argument every time I hear it, it just makes me cringe. Yeah. The other thing is right now, I like the idea of a third party, okay? I think a lot of people do. I would go for that. But right now, we have a very unhealthy democracy. And, it's, again, part of the conservative tactic to split the Democrats apart. It happened with Jill Stein in 2020. Right now, if you don't vote straight ticket with the Democratic Party, it might as well be a vote for the Trump and conservatives. And listen, yeah, you might. We have our issues issues too. I get it. With power, money, it always attracts people that, unfortunately, might not have the greatest intentions. But right now, I don't care if you are a Bernie Sanders progressive or middle of the road, traditional Democrat like Gavin Newsom. You got to vote for him. This is the midterms, and this next election might be it. It might be it for this country. We all have to come out and vote Democrat.
Jess, I appreciate the call. I want to go to Nancy from Oakland, Illinois. Nancy, you're on the air.
Hi, Jeff. I totally agree with the last caller, the guy you just hung up with, because that's the problem. The root of the problem is we've been following an undemocratic two-party system from day one. Many respected people have written books about it. We were never established as a democracy, and we certainly don't have democracy now. Yeah. And because we are living in a lawless country, because the criminally insane people are in charge right now, and they're destroying us, our White House, and the world, we're not standing up to them. And I agree with him. Right now, because of where they put us, because the politicians broke us up long ago, we have to vote Democratic right now, straight Democratic. And even though the Democratic Party itself is not a united one party, because we have too many, there's three causes for this, three groups who are causing this split, and that's the entire criminally insane Republican Party, the maggots, who are even more insane, and the moderate Dems, who would rather fight progressives than turn around and fight the cons like they should be. Poor Bernie Sanders, God bless him. They've been fighting him forever. Back in 2016, they're bad-mouthing Biden. They do all that. They're always bad-mouthing the Democrats. This system that we're following does not support democracy. And because they fought against, they blocked Biden and Bernie in 2016, and they forced Hillary on us. That was their mistake right there. But it's been going on forever. They destroyed our educational system long ago, back when Reagan was in, and they took over the media. The media is not mainstream media. The media is corporate-owned, and it has been since the late 70s or early, whenever it was that they combined news. They didn't separate.
Yeah, and it's getting worse. No, I hear it loud and clear, Nancy, and I appreciate it. Thanks for making the point. Were you able to finish your point?
We don't have anybody fighting for us.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but the politicians turned our Congress into an ATM machine. They're just there to get rich.
So where I would say is, and Yamada isn't here to defend herself. And I have some of the same sort of knee-jerk reaction because I went through these active debates on this whole, both sides are the same. I went through these debates hardcore in 2000, in 1999, 2000. An ongoing discussion I've had with a dear friend of mine, somebody I respect very much. He is a self-described socialist, has pulled himself up by real bootstraps, grew up homeless, is now earned his PhD, now works as an economist, brilliant guy. And we have this ongoing discussion, and where I take the side of sort of constructive engagement. I take the side of even constructive patriotism. He's left the country, and I still engage in the discussion because I want Yamada on the team. Whatever the team is that's trying to figure out what democracy should do, I want Yamada on the team. I want the person who's actually thinking about how do we wield power in a moral way. I want those people on the team. Now, I think there's give and take in that. I think that if we actually believe in democracy, part of that is humility. Part of that is recognizing that I don't get my way all the time. And my conception of the good, my conception of the best objective, my conception of what should happen, if I got it every single time, it either meant I was an amazing guesser, or I had no views of my own, or I was in fact a tyrant in a position to project my tyranny. That thinking that people who disagree with me are therefore must be bad and wrong all the time, that sets aside the humility that I think is required to adopt if one actually believes in democracy. So I try to be on the side of sort of constructive engagement. I also think that we have, I recognize that we have historically gaping wealth disparities and historically gaping power disparities. And when I say that politicians' jobs, by whatever party, and there is a profound difference, anybody who says there isn't, is not being honest, because in their quiet moments they know there is. They can say there's not enough of a difference, but they know there's a profound difference. But by whatever party, the politicians' job is to wield power, to gain and wield power using in the context of the existing power landscape. That is what a politician does. I'm not advocating for that, I'm describing that. The activist job is to try to change that power landscape. That's one of the reasons this court sits. Maybe the primary reason is to think about what that power landscape should look like. What can we do? And that includes absolutely the media landscape. I could talk every single show about what I just said. I could say it 100 times and I would still need to say it 1,000 more. But instead, let me go to Steve from Minneapolis. Steve, you're on the air.
Jefferson, thank you for taking my call. I appreciate it. A couple callers back, I just wanted to comment. 2 or 3 years ago, I purchased an e-bike, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made.
It's Wonder Drug.
It encourages me to exercise. So instead of going to the post office, which is 3 miles away, I'll ride my e-bike. Instead of going to the bank, which is 4 miles away, I'll take my e-bike.
Yep.
I'll put some tunes on and I'll sing along with them, and it prevents me from blowing out my knees and then makes it easier to make that decision.
It's a Wonder Drug.
But the reason that I called.
Oh, you got 5 seconds.
Okay, fine. The whole voter ID thing is a diabolical solution to a mythical problem. There is no voter fraud. I have served as an election judge for 26 elections, and I can tell you that the procedures are airtight.
There you go, Steve.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Way back in 1964, when Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Republicans started this rant about how the election of 1960, Jock Kennedy stole that election, and there's voter fraud in America. And it became a thing. They started this thing called Operation Eagle Eye. William Rehnquist was running it in Arizona, trying to intimidate Hispanics and African Americans into not voting, essentially. They have now used this claim that non-citizens are voting, this voter fraud claim, in virtually every red state to make it harder to vote, to purge people off the voting rolls, to make people's votes not counted with their exact signature matches.
It's a scam. It's a grift that they've been running for 60 years, and the American media won't call them out on it. There's a whole piece about it called Trump and the GOP's Big Lie 2.0 over at HartmannReport.com. Please check it out. You'll find it fascinating.
Back. Let's do a quick speed round. I think some people got the same, have overlapping points, but they're worth hearing. Deborah from St. Paul, Minnesota, you're on the air.
Hi, Jefferson. Hey, yeah, I'm sorry. I really feel for this younger person that called in, but this is not the time in history to go for a third party. It's just too important of a time. We all need to vote blue in November. I mean, it is good to do go through the primary system and get the best candidate, but we need to vote for the Democrats this election. I get it. I know she's young, and I'm sorry. I don't mean to gang up on her, but I'm just worried. There's lots of young people out there like her, and if they get that message, we need them in November.
Yeah. We do. We need them in November. Deborah, which is one of the reasons I want us to lead in this conversation with empathy, and even sort of speak directly to the person, because each generation, I think, needs to discover for themselves the best way to proceed, and each person sort of been through some ringers, can offer their own perspective, offer their own guide, but try not to be patronizing in that whole deal. Not try to assume we sort of know. And I'm trying to walk that line myself. But anyway, last word for you, Deborah.
Okay. Well, please just listen to Bernie and AOC's message. They're the people that we need to lead our party. And and if there's any bill or lawmakers out there listening, the no tax on tips and the no tax on Social Security go a long way. That the Republicans are so much, they talk about. And if we could just all have the same message going into November, that would be helpful too.
I hear you. No, that fundamental math that I started the show with, of what it takes. You got 25% of the country that self-identifies as progressive. What do you do in that context? If you believe in democracy, what do you do? I think it's an interesting question. Vince from Wellsville, Kansas, you're on the air.
Good morning. You had referenced a quotation. I don't know the source, but I only became aware of it during the Vietnam War years. That was evil will conquer only when enough good men do nothing.
Yeah.
That ties into the idea that perhaps we need to dump the Democratic Party. Well, I don't believe we should. Mm-hmm. Third party, I'm not afraid of that. Mm-hmm. But you got to keep in mind that the voices for that third party formation, many of them are good, honorable, knowledgeable, devoted patriots. But the ones you're going to hear loudest are the demagogues. Mm-hmm. And you can never trust a demagogue. Yeah. Do you have an opinion about that?
Of course. I do think that that's the moral tension, right? That's the heck. It was the tension for a German in the 1930s, right? Do they leave the country? Do they try to fight the party that is killing people and then would kill them? Many heroes died. Probably not enough heroes. Had there been 100 more well-placed, powerful heroes willing to stand up to the rise of the Nazi Party, history would have been profoundly different. Or do you be Oskar Schindler and create a list and at least save some starfish, save some human beings, right? Using the allegory of sort of the old man throwing the starfish into the, I guess it was a young, you tell the story as a young woman, doesn't really matter, same story. Saving starfish from the beach, and somebody walks by and says, can't you understand, it will not, what you're doing won't do anything. There's still so many starfish that will die. It won't matter. What you're doing won't matter. And the human being throwing the starfish into the ocean throws that starfish and says, well, it matters to that one. Whatever story we use, this is one of the fundamental, lasting moral choices that each person needs to make. My moral choice is constructive engagement. My moral choice is trying to both think about what makes sense now and what makes sense in the long term, and try to keep both of those ideas in my head at the same time and continue to chew gum. So that's my big picture response, Vince. Kathy from Lansing, Michigan, you're on the air.
Hi. I need to get this fact out there. There's this misconception about what happened in Michigan in 2016, that Jill Stein was the difference. Well, if we take, Jill Stein's votes were more than, added to Hillary's would have been more.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at another couple of numbers. Libertarian Gary Johnson got, I think, around double the amount of votes that Jill Stein got. And now let's look at what else happened. If you add Jill Stein's votes to Gary Johnson's vote, it is the thousands of votes left.
Yeah, Kathy, I can respond. Finish your point, but I want to respond to it. We got about 20 seconds. Oh, no, we don't. We're going to break. The quick thing, there's a legal principle that deals with this. Okay, this has been it's proximate cause versus but-for cause. It's like, well, what do you blame, right? And say, well, it's not Jill Stein's fault, because had only blank, it would have been, it would have been different also. So I think when people say cause, they're really just saying is a proximate cause, sort of who deserves the blame versus but for that thing, what would have happened. And both are legitimate views. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
202-808-9925. Fill this room with your wisdom.
Our book in today's Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey Kaye. Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. This is from the introduction. On December 1st, 1862, in the midst of the Civil War, just weeks before he was to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his annual message to Congress. Lincoln firmly believed that the United States had an historic responsibility to demonstrate to the world that people can govern themselves, make equal rights not just a self-evident truth, but a manifest one, and create a political and economic order in which working people, both white and black, are not compelled to bow to anyone, neither aristocrats nor capitalists. Empowered by tens of thousands of black slaves who were already liberating themselves from bondage by escaping to the Union lines, and increasingly confident that the majority of his fellow Americans would recognize the truth of what he was saying, Lincoln closed his address by calling on them to see that the time had come to remember who they were and what they demanded, or what that demanded. He told them that to save the nation and all that it represented, they must live up to the nation's declared revolutionary purpose and promise, and act to radically enhance American freedom by bringing an end to slavery. This is a quote from Lincoln's address. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows we do know how to save it. We, even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. We too, end of quote from Lincoln. Back to Harvey. We too cannot escape history. Our own struggle to save the nation and the promise it proclaims has begun. Finally, after more than 40 years of fear-driven class war and culture war campaigns against the democratic achievements of generations, the hard-won rights of workers, women and people of color, and the very memory of how they were secured, and now both in the wake of the election debacle of 2016, which gave the presidency to the corrupt, mendacious, racist, sexist, and treacherous demagogue Donald Trump, and continued control of Congress to the formerly conservative but increasingly reactionary Republican Party, and in the face of intensified class and culture war campaigns, we the people have come not only to recognize that American democratic life is in jeopardy, but also to mobilize in hopes of saving it. Millions of us have rallied to the resistance and expressed our democratic fears and desires in action. In the historic Women's March and March for Our Lives of young people, the protests, demonstrations, and legal actions to defend the lives and rights of immigrants and refugees, the Me Too movement to combat sexual assault and harassment, the massive teachers' strikes for higher pay and better funding of public schools in states red and blue, and the enthusiastic canvassing and campaigning for a blue wave to win back Congress in the 2018 midterm elections. But resistance is not enough. The time has come for us to remember who we are and what that demands. The time has come for us to embrace our radical history, the history of how a generation of Americans, high and low, and in all their diversity, not only turned their colonial rebellion into a war for independence, but also imbued American life, whether they all intended it or not, with radical imperative and impulse by declaring a revolutionary promise of freedom, equality, and democracy for all. The history of how generations of radicals and reformers served as the prophetic memory of that promise, and how generations of ordinary men and women, native-born and immigrant, struggled to make real the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to expand not only the we in We the People, but also the powers of the people. And most especially in view of the crises we ourselves face, the history of how our greatest generations confronted and prevailed over the forces that threatened to destroy the nation and bury its revolutionary promise in the 1770s, 1860s, and 1930s and 1940s, not to mention the 1960s, by acting to make the United States, both inspired by Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and pushing them to go farther than they might otherwise have gone, radically freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. The time has come to take hold of that history and make America radical again. I've titled this collection of my speeches and essays, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, for reasons that will become obvious, and yet I cannot help but confess that if I had had to title it otherwise, I would have been sorely tempted to use, with full attribution, the title Max Lerner gave to his 1938 work, It Is Later Than You Think, The Need for a Militant Democracy. While it may not seem so, the crisis we face is no less demanding of action, urgent action, than that which confronted his generation. The book Take Hold of Our History by Harvey J. Kaye.
Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. When Ronald Reagan took over America in 1981, we handed him a brand gleaming new country. Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, Jack Kennedy, they had built America. We had brand new schools, brand new hospitals, brand new interstate highway systems, brand new airports, infrastructure. We were the envy of the world. And then Republicans came along and they said, well, you just cut the top tax rate from 74% down to 27% and everything will trickle down. Instead, what do we get? Billionaires and poverty. They said, hey, just deregulate guns, and an armed society is a polite society. Instead, we've got more school shootings than anywhere in the world. They said, just kill off civics and history classes in our schools and it'll liberate our young people to focus on science and math. Now we've got people who don't know how our government works. I mean, it just goes on from there. There's a whole rant about it over at HartmannReport.com titled FDR Saved America, Then the GOP Ripped Us Apart. Check it out.
I remember when the truth still meant a person's word held weight. Goldwater stood on principles even when the stakes were great. But now the truth's been buried.
Let's go straight to your call. See if we can clear the board before the big finish. My moral advice, point at the thing you think is the worst thing, or point at the highest leverage good thing that's a winnable thing. That's one way to approach it. Stephen from Yorba Linda, you're on the air. Yep, go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, hi. Yeah. I just wanted to comment and remind people that, people keep talking about us, people saying we're a democracy, et cetera, but I want to remind the folks out there that technically this is a democratic republic. And that's important because, that just means we democratically elect the people that are going to represent us instead of, everybody always voting for everything that Congress is considering.
Sure.
And that's significant.
Sure.
And the other part is, I think what we have a situation here where a lot of Democrats, registered Democrats, have switched to independents. At least one of my sons has done that. And so now it's about a third Republican, a third Democrat, and a third independent, I think, the statistics of our country. And so, if that's true, that means it's really important this round for the elections to some of those independents to take a look at the overall disaster we're heading into and, decide to vote Democrat this fall, because otherwise we may be really messed up.
Yeah, no, political parties are vessels, right? Thomas Jefferson figured this out. Your best chance of actually enacting something is you could gather a big group of people together and say, all right, folks, what are our priorities? If we vote together, we have a chance of making this happen. Political parties aren't in the Constitution. They were the strategic response to a mathematical necessity or a mathematical reality. And the Democratic Party has been a vessel, right? One of the reasons I love the Democratic Party, I just said it, I love it, is not because of its successes merely, is not because of its virtue, but because I think it mirrors or maps or aligns with the story of the United States, which is a redemption story. And I don't love it because of its successes. I don't think it merits time because of its, or even in spite of its flaws, but maybe even because of its flaws. And I think we have a responsibility to try to bend the arc of history towards justice in our country and our communities. And yes, in the political party we think is the most redeemable. So which is the political party for you that is the most redeemable? And how can you work to help the country, help yourself, help the political party of your choice, reaching that redemption? That to me is the most moral path. Speaking just for myself, Bill, Port Townsend, Washington, you're up.
Jefferson, hey, the first time I've spoken with you.
Hello.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank Tom. Thank Mateo. Your guys' work is world changing. You work for the general welfare. Thanks so much.
Oh, it means a lot.
And, it does. It really does. And here's the thing. We've got a two-party system, and one party's dysfunctional. The Republican Party is a seditionist party. Make no mistakes, we're living in a dictatorship right now as we speak. This thing doesn't deserve to be referred to as sir, mister, or boss. And the Democratic Party needs to Voldemort this guy, refer to him as a dictator. And then if we just show up to No King's protest, the 7 million number you cited on the last one, those were only registered people.
Yeah.
I didn't register. Nobody I know registered.
Yeah.
So it was way larger, and we need 1%, like Nader said. We get 3.2 million people to show up on our property in D.C., choke off the entirety of D.C., and have a festival. I'll pack my tent, my bedroll, and the duffel bag, and I'll hitchhike, bus, however we get to D.C., and do a rent check on this clown and evict him.
I hear you, Bill.
We're in a dictatorship. I believe that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I am not ruling out more vigorous, peaceful response to what I think is a moral obligation to address something. If it's not a dictatorship, it's at least dictatorship curious. Chris from the Catskills, you're on the air.
Good afternoon. I wanted to bring up, as a registered Democrat, I've got some serious concerns about the Chicago City Councilwoman Marie Hadden, who made comments recently about the unfortunate shooting of the 18-year-old college freshman who was from Westchester County, New York, that was shot in her district in Chicago, walking along the lakefront park, and made comments that were very cold and callous. and it's being underreported in the media, but there is being reports on conservative talk radio saying, where's the outrage from the Democratic Party? I'm a Democrat, and I'm outraged by it.
Yeah.
Because she essentially made comments saying that the young woman was walking with like 3 or 4 of her friends, and it was late, it was like 1:45 in the morning, that it was a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that she startled somebody that was carrying a gun.
Yeah.
And essentially she said it was devoid of emotion, very callously. And the way that she phrased it, it made it sound like that she was giving more justification for an undocumented illegal Guatemalan immigrant who had been recently arrested for shoplifting and didn't bother to show up to
Than the
court.
person who got shot and killed.
That he had more of a right to be walking in that park than the 18-year-old college student and her friends did. And if you investigate this woman's background, she is categorized as a social activist and a housing rights activist, and she had defeated a 28-year, 14-term incumbent in a Democratic Party primary. But these are the things that are making us lose as Democrats to people like Donald Trump, because we're putting up horrible candidates like this woman, okay? And another problem closer to home for me, I had just read in the newspaper.
I think we should probably do one per, unless it's related.
Mayor Mondami is discussing in New York City, they want to lower the estate tax exemption where someone can pass on their estate to their heirs from $7.25 million to $750,000. What that's going to result in is a flood of wealthy people moving out of New York City. This insanity has to stop, or the Democratic Party's not going to win. I'd like to see Mark Cuban run for president, and I'd like to see Sherrod Brown for vice president. I'm a Sherrod Brown.
All right, Alan. That's 3 for you. When you have 3, there's not. You can pick which one to respond to. I can go to the next caller. Given how full the board is, I'm going to pick the next caller. CJ from Shreveport. You're on the air.
Hey, it's about all that third-party stuff people have been talking about today. Have you ever heard of a little something called Duverger's Law?
You know what? I think I know Duverger's Law, but I couldn't have quoted it as Duverger's Law. But go ahead.
Duverger's Law is a mathematical law that basically says that under certain types of election systems, including the election system we're under, called, or most of the U.S. is under, called first past the post, or plurality voting, just one vote per candidate. Whoever gets the most vote wins. It's the easiest for people to understand, but it has devastating consequences. And Duverger's Law is among them. And it basically says that if you vote for a third-party candidate, you're helping the major party candidate that you most oppose.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's math. There's math behind this.
No, it's. I feel like a dum-dum because I have cited word for word Duverger's Law, word for word, without being able to quote chapter and verse on Duverger. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you remerging my
real quick.
thinking.
A couple of pop culture references. I know you like pop culture references. First off, an old Star Trek original series episode, considered the best, The City on the Edge of Forever by Harlan Ellison. I'm not going to go into the whole plot of it, but basically let's say we find a really good third-party candidate who just has awesome principles and things like that. In this day and age, with the situation we're up against, basically be Edith Keeler. Okay, and the second pop culture reference is listen and understand. Duverger's Law is out there. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop ever until democracy is dead or we switch to another election system not subject to it.
I'm adding Maurice Duverger's Law to my set of Grand Unified Theory principles, and thank you so much, CJ, for your participation.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
All right, folks, we go quick. We can give everybody a chance. We're going to have to go quick before the big finish. Alan from Winterport, Maine. You're on Speed Round. You win the most patient listener award.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I heard Borowitz on the XM, the same network here on I can't think whose show it was, but Dean Obadiah said that, what if Trump were a sleeper agent for Iran? Yeah. I mean, he's given Iran everything. Iran now has a cohesiveness against an enemy. Iran has, now they can, show the great Satan really is the great Satan. Yeah. He's given them, a new life against, even though they've killed thousands of the citizens, the Ayatollah. And then he and Israel and America have killed all the people you can possibly negotiate with, so you can't have a negotiation. Yeah. It's amazing. If you think, we always thought that, he was a Russian agent, a Russian sleeper agent. Maybe he's a sleeper agent for Russia and Iran. He's basically destroyed America more than either of them could have done through any other means. Yeah, no, it's, there are a number of lenses we can look at this through. A moral lens or an ethical lens is one, right? Is this, and what's the moral or ethical justification for warfare, for violent action? You can look through a financial. You can look through a financial lens, but even if you just look through yours, through a national self-interest lens, one way to ask the question: if you run the Department of Defense, now the Department of War, if you run the State Department, if you run the White House, the question it seems like you should ask is, would this help the country more or help its adversaries more? And I think in this one, you make a pretty good case. If your adversaries would root for this, maybe there's a reason not to do it. But Alan, thank you so much. We've got some callers I want to get to, but appreciate you. We've got time for a couple other callers. I see them coming in. Mateo, we can let in a couple other callers. People are going pretty fast. Pammy from Downers Grove, Illinois, you're on the air.
Hello?
Pammy, you there?
I am here. Thank you for allowing me to talk on your show. I had the honor of talking to Tom and Bernie Sanders years ago.
Well, there you go. Thank you for the honor of your presence.
Well, thank you for your service. And so many people called. It's spot on. And as you know, the third party won't work because we're literally tied to the others. I did vote for other people. And I remember going back to Ross Perot days, too. The thing is just like Einstein said, coming from Illinois, the most nuclear power plants in the United States.
I didn't know that.
Peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding. So being angry and hostile, we need to lean towards being more empowered. The key is keep on educating yourself, and that's what happened. We're both held by hostage of both parties because they both take money from everybody. I was not even allowed to go in this election because my husband divorced me while I was in the hospital, and everything is under those names. So I'm in that nutshell, stuck right there, trying to get out of that catastrophe. But the thing is what worked for us when we got Obama involved, and that's the moms from contaminated water in Downers Grove, Illinois, Ann Muniz, who died, helped to get the right to know law enacted like so many other mothers, like Tricia Krause, and whose daughter died, and her kids, and all of them suffering from cancer with the water. We eliminated all of these things. But the fact is that we can all protect our water supplies and our families, whether we're in the United States or whether we're in another country. It's the moms and the people and the kids that bring things together. So we can sign a petition together and get our elected officials to stop fighting each other and taking money from the same corporations that want us to fight each other.
Thanks, Pammy.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Way back in 1964, when Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Republicans started this rant about how the election of 1960, Jock Kennedy stole that election, and there's voter fraud in America. And it became a thing. They started this thing called Operation Eagle Eye. William Rehnquist was running it in Arizona. Trying to intimidate Hispanics and African Americans into not voting, essentially. They have now used this claim that non-citizens are voting, this voter fraud claim, in virtually every red state to make it harder to vote, to purge people off the voting rolls, to make people's votes not counted with their exact signature matches. It's a scam. It's a grift that they've been running for 60 years, and the American media won't call them out on it. There's a whole piece about it called Trump and the GOP's Big Lie 2.0 over at HartmannReport.com. Please check it out. You'll find it fascinating.
And we're back. Let's go to Mildred from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Hi, Jeff. I want to make this brief, and it's about the call of March the 12th of 2026 when Trump had a phone call with Vladimir Putin, and the discussion was about the Israel-Iran war and the value of the dollar. Now I'm going to jump to 2021 in the book War that was by Bob Woodward, cites that Trump told an aide to leave the Mar-a-Lago office so he could speak privately by phone to Putin, and he had spoken to him 7 times in 2021. We are being ruled by an adversary named Putin, and Trump is the gopher, and that's who he works for, and this is a danger to America. We're in danger of the MAGA right, who wants to destroy our rights in the Constitution. So we, the people, have to vote Democratic. And I'm going to say this, and I know it can be proven beyond the shadow of a doubt, that Trump is a Putin asset. He always has been, and he did not win in 2024, and he did not win in 2017 when he became the occupant. He's the occupant. We've got two forces in the United States, the American MAGA oligarch and our adversary, Vladimir Putin. And they are our enemies, and we have to vote Democratic, and we have to be out on March the 28th of 2026, No King's Day. We are fighting for the very essence of that Constitution and this land and our freedom.
Mildred, thank you for the call. Here's what I'll say in response. When Hillary Clinton was right when she described Trump as a Putin puppet. She was right. My messaging advice would now be, and would have been sometime in that period and in the interim, rather than saying only that, right? Because it's like, it's such a big thing. It can be hard for people to believe. But what is absolutely clear is the risk is too high. The risk was too high in 2020, whether it is Ukraine, whether it is Israel, whether it is Iran, that the risk is too high. And we make decisions, we make investment decisions, we make decisions of our spouses based on probabilities, based on hunches, based on risk profiles. And Trump's risk profile on the question of loyalty to this country is just too high. I believe that is a winning message. Even if somebody isn't sure about the accusation, they've got to be confident that the risk is too damn high. Margaret, we got just a little bit, 30 seconds for you.
Yes, hi. I'm basically from Seattle. I just want to say, back in the 70s, before there were any gay rights around, we were trying to get the city council to pass 2 things: no discrimination in housing, no discrimination in employment. And we, in the first gathering was not a gay pride parade, it was a gay rights protest in 74. We went on a Saturday, we stopped traffic, we ran down to the city place, signs, everything. We got them to put those laws on the books. And that's only because we worked with the Democratic Party. We got them to agree that we were worth, not being discriminated against, and you have to work with an existing party. If we try to do it by ourselves, less than 10% of the population, it would never have gone.
Wouldn't have had a chance.
And so,
Margaret, Margaret, I appreciate it. Thank you for that work, and thank you for that lesson. No, I'm reminded. I read a book on the history of Ralph Nader, and it quoted one of his longtime early staffers. He said, Ralph would say, and I know Ralph and admire him in many, many respects. I think up until he ran for president, he was one of the top activism American heroes in American history, and I don't think that wipes away. I don't think his running for president wipes that away, but they said, that Ralph was always saying there was no difference, but it just turned out that everything we worked on, we ended up having to work with Democrats in order to get it done. And so I think that experience is pretty apt. Josh from Pensacola, you're on the air. You're our last caller.
Hey, just four things real quick.
That'll be fast.
The Democratic Party, I think, needs to change. You don't have to answer. One, the Democratic Party has to be class conscious. Two, they need to drop gun control because socialized medicine would save more lives. Three, Israel is a lead balloon. Democrats can't be supporting Israel because they've done genocide to Palestinians. They started a war with Iran. They've funded Hamas multiple times, and Trump is also an Israeli asset. There's an FBI report in the Epstein files that talked about it. And fourthly, the Democratic Party needs to appeal to men because they need to explain how capitalism harms men rather than internet feminists constantly attacking men. You need to get Zoomer males who are going further to the right to be engaged. You can't do that by demonizing them. We need men to form a united leftist, to help form a united leftist front. That's all. Thank you very much.
Josh, thank you so much for your call. And ultimately, yeah, majority means a majority. You're not getting to a majority with only one sex or gender. That is mathematically accurate. What I want to do is say thank you. Social proof is the most powerful persuasive tool there is, and you offer some of it. You're the coalition of the benevolently irrational, the good people doing good things for no good reason, and you are priceless. Definition of priceless, worth a lot, not for sale. And with you, democracy is possible. I'm Jeff. This is your show, and I'll be back with you tomorrow. Be well.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.